Feeling overwhelmed by life's chaos? Discover the ancient secret to finding peace in just a few moments a day. Welcome to Buddhism Breeze, your sanctuary for mindfulness, wisdom, and inner calm. Here we explore the timeless teachings of Buddhism to help you navigate life with clarity and serenity. In today's video, we're diving into best Buddhist teachings to let go of what you can't control, to bring a gentle breeze of peace into your day. So take a deep breath, subscribe, and let's begin this journey together. Picture yourself going to sleep without the weight of the day on your chest. No whirling thoughts, no need to correct what already occurred, just calm. True calm constructed from the inside out. But be real. How many nights have you lain awake in your head replaying conversations, stressing about things that are long gone, attempting to control that which was never yours to grasp? How you release at night determines the life you wake up to. If you go to bed with acceptance, with peace, with the correct teachings, you'll feel lighter, clearer, more attuned to what truly matters. But if you go to bed resisting, trying to control the uncontrollable, then you're bringing that struggle with you into tomorrow before it even starts. Tonight, you're going to learn how to let go. Not by force, not by acting like everything is okay when it isn't, but by seeing what Buddhist wisdom has been attempting to tell us for centuries. Peace doesn't derive from control. It derives from release. These aren't soothing words to lull you to sleep. They are revolutionary tools, ancient wisdoms to liberate your mind, soothe your feelings, and navigate your spirit. So go ahead and make a silent vow to yourself. Whisper it or put it in the comments if you're listening online. From tonight on, I let go of what I cannot control. I choose peace. You're not muttering words. You're freeing yourself. The more you do this, the more your nervous system gets used to sensing what peace is like, and the more it comes naturally to return to it again and again. Repeat it now, then settle in, because tonight your mind rests at last. Let's start. And now that the intention has been established, something more fundamental starts. Tonight is no longer a matter of escaping your thoughts. It's about unburdening the weight that was never intended to be carried in the first place, beginning with the most prevalent but unseen burden of all, other people's feelings. Because most individuals go to bed exhausted, not from their own wars, but from shouldering the storms of all those around them. That is where the unburdening starts. There's a silent type of suffering that hardly ever gets noticed. It's not melodramatic. It doesn't scream aloud, but it manifests in the tension in your chest when the person you're with is distressed. It manifests in the need to fix, to calm, to quiet your own desires, so another won't disintegrate. It's when serenity is a facade, and your job is to keep the sky intact so others don't get wet, and the price, your own freedom of emotions. This is what Buddhist philosophy untangles, the misapprehension that compassion entails control, that to love one must bear. But genuine compassion does not feature shackles. It features boundaries. And this evening, it starts with realizing that love is not quantified by the amount of pain shared. It's quantified by the amount of liberty both individuals feel in each other's company. The teachings reveal that each being has their own karma, their own lessons, path, and emotional weather. Regardless of how close a person is, their suffering is still theirs to feel, face, and learn from. Attempting to take it away not only robs them of their growth, but drains your soul in the process. The cloud can provide shade, but it was never designed to bear the entire sky. It begins with awareness, that little nudge within, when you realize you've crossed the line, when you stop listening and begin fixing, when you're no longer responding from your heart, but reacting from your fear of their pain. That's when the balance shifts, and your compassion softly morphs into control. A lot of folks believe they're assisting by holding others' emotions, but assistance that steals your peace isn't assistance, it's entanglement. And Buddhism instructs that the greatest assistance you can give is presence, not pressure. To sit with someone in their tempest, and not become the tempest. To hold space, not responsibility. Because emotional boundaries do not disconnect people. They safeguard the truth of connection. They say, "I'm with you," rather than, "Let me live this for you." It's a subtle strength, one that recognizes when to speak and when to be silent. One that ceases to need to be the rescuer in every room. Because in needing to rescue, often there lies a greater wound, the pain of being unneeded. But when compassion is genuine, it doesn't have to be sensational. It doesn't have to be big. It trusts other people's processes. It knows that pain isn't always something to be fixed. It's a teacher, and that entails allowing other people to learn. Buddhism won't tell you to stop loving. It will teach you how to love without being lost. That's why the breath is so important in Buddhist practice. It keeps you centered. When the person is hurting and you begin to feel overwhelmed, the breath reminds you, this feeling is not mine. This hurting is passing through, but need not pass into me. Breathe in, breathe out. Be with yourself, even as you remain with them. And what of guilt? That insidious voice that is telling you that if you don't get them to stop hurting, you're failing. Buddhist teachings confront that voice with wisdom. It shows that guilt is not necessarily an indication of being wrong. Occasionally, it's merely the reverberation of conditioning that's past. The concept that love is sacrifice. That being good means always being the strong one. But that's not equilibrium. That's imbalance masquerading as virtue. In order to let go of this pattern, the mind needs to be retrained, not by compulsion, but by awareness. Each time you catch yourself wanting to correct the mood of another, stop. Ask yourself, is this mine to hold? And if not, let the feeling come and go without becoming attached to it. You are not the anchor for their feelings. You are your own. The more you practice, the more second nature it becomes. Like a muscle that recalls how to stretch freely once the holding has been released. There is a freedom that arises when you release the need to be the emotional anchor for everybody else. Your nervous system unwinds. Your sleep gets better. Your relationships get authentic. Because when you cease to take in what's not yours, people can finally connect with the true you. Not the one you've been pretending to be to keep others safe. This is the secret wisdom of non-attachment. Not apathy, not coldness, but clarity. The clarity to speak and say, I trust you, and I love you to feel your feelings. I will not steal them from you, because they are sacred, because you are strong, because I believe in your way. That kind of love is a rare one. It's not always valued at the time. Some will try to have you bear their load. Some will begrudge your boundaries. But the Dharma alerts us that holding space is stronger than holding suffering. And over time, those who are prepared will notice the difference. They'll sense your calm, your stability, your trust, and they'll start trusting themselves as well. Buddhist monks do this by equanimity. the capacity to remain grounded in compassion without being swept away. They chant lines such as all beings are the owners of their actions. This isn't detachment from human beings. It's respect for every individual's inner guide, a reminder that development is not something you bestow. It's something the soul alone can win one instant at a time. And the people you love the most, of course, family, friends, children. That's where this lesson is put to the greatest test. But even there, the same holds true. Love that attempts to control even with gentleness is love that is afraid. Love that releases with trust, and being present is healing love. Consider a tree. The roots run deep, but the branches sway with the wind. You can be firm in your caring without being rigid in your requirement to control others' feelings. You can provide shade without shading out the sun. You can hold up others without substituting their ground with yours. There's one line of the Dhammapada that goes, "Let go of the past. Let go of the future. Let go of the present. With a heart free of all grasping, you shall find peace." It sounds radical, but the essence of it is basic. Let go of what you can't control, and other people's feelings. That's the head of that list. The mind will fight this at first. It will tell stories, but they need me, but they'll fall apart. But if I don't intervene, who will? These are not the voice of love. They're the voice of fear, dressed in love's clothing. Love does not tell you you're helpless without it. Love says you've got this. I'm here, but you've got this. You're not bound to repair sorrow that is not yours. You don't have to heal anger that doesn't belong to you. You can be generous without becoming drained. That is the dharma of emotional sovereignty. And in this release, you create space for something much more lovely: respect. Genuine, soul-deep respect. The kind that allows you to say, "I honor your experience, and I won't interrupt your journey just to make myself more comfortable." This type of respect shifts everything. It shifts the way you present yourself. It shifts the way others feel around you because they can feel it. Your presence doesn't weigh people down. It lightens them. It doesn't require anything. It just is relaxed, grounded, receptive. And that type of presence, it's indelible. So tonight, as you sleep, make this your mantra. Their emotions are not my responsibility. My serenity is not a sacrifice. I can love without carrying. I can care without control. You might feel resistance. You might feel guilt. But with every breath, let the feelings rise and fall like waves. You are not here to silence the storm. You are here to be the stillness beneath it. Sleep will be easier when the burden is lifted. And when you awaken, the world might be the same. But something within will have changed. A still strength, a gentle knowing, a lightness that lingers with you long after waking from the dream. And when you release what was never yours to release, something surprise fills the empty space. Stillness, not quiet from without, but quiet from far within. The kind that doesn't cry out for peace, but is already peace. For when you no longer drink in the turmoil of others, you are faced with a truth even more difficult to endure. The turmoil inside yourself. That's where the true practice starts. Not in letting go of others, but in being able to remain stable when your own mind starts trembling. That's when still water becomes your guide. There is a surface to every life, that outside layer that gets battered first when the winds of stress, loss, change, or uncertainty start to blow. Most folks live on this surface, responding, rehashing, twirling with the tempest and labeling it living. But far beneath that surface is another space, a still quiet that never stirs, however crazy things become above. And the mission is not to outswim the waves, it's to anchor in that depth and learn to live from there. Meditation in Buddhism is not an escape. It's not a time out from actual life. It's the training ground for stability. The space where you gradually, steadily come back to the center of yourself, not by struggling with the noise, but by no longer holding on to it. You sit, you breathe, thoughts come up, thoughts go down. And at first, it seems like failure, because the mind will shriek, it will judge, it will tug you one way and then another. But the practice is not silence. It's being able to not follow the noise. Each breath becomes an anchor, a reminder that your mind can flit, that you don't need to flit along with it, that your thoughts can spin, but you can just stay. And the longer you sit, the more you see most of what was upsetting you wasn't the world, it was your response to it. In the Dharma, this stillness is referred to as samatha, a soothing of the waters of the mind. But it's not forced. You can't cling your way into stillness. You let yourself ease into it gently, patiently. The harder you try to be calm, the more it flees from you. But as soon as you stop demanding peace and just give room for what is, the surface calms. Thoughts aren't the enemy. Feelings aren't the enemy. Even suffering isn't the enemy. The only enemy, if you can call it that, is to forget you are greater than all of those things. Meditation doesn't quiet the storm. It shows you how to sit in the middle of it and not be budged. The Buddha once described a mind like a lake. When the water is churned up, it reflects nothing clearly. But when it's calm, everything is seen. Not because the world itself has changed, but because your eyesight finally clears up. That's what meditative stillness does. It restores your clarity. It reveals to you what is real and what is merely the hurricane of conditioned thought. Stillness, however, is not inactivity. It is not doing nothing or being numb. It is acting from a place deeper than fear or urgency. In this state, even the most difficult decisions can be made with ease because you are no longer deciding from panic. You're deciding from presence. To practice this, it's not the intensity, but rather the consistency. You don't have to sit for hours. What you must do is come back and back again to your breath. Even 5 minutes with wholehearted attention becomes holy. The breath becomes the bridge between body and mind. It anchors the nervous system. It quiets the spinning. It opens the space between impulse and response. And in that space, you discover your strength. Some days, the storm will rage more loudly. Thoughts will be quicker. Old hurts will surface. But every storm is a challenge of where you've anchored your anchor. If it's anchored to outcome, opinion, or ego, you'll be swept away. But if it's anchored to the breath, to being present, to awareness itself, you remain. This is the practice of non-reactivity. And it's not passive. It's one of the strongest skills a human can cultivate, because the world will challenge you. People will get you wrong. Life will rock you, but you don't need to rock. That is always your choice. Stillness is the demonstration that your peace is unconditional. A lot of people hear non-reactive and believe it equals cold, but actually, it's the opposite. The non-reactive individual feels whole. They simply don't get lost in the emotion. They see the rage, but do not become it. They see the fear, but do not let it drive. They see the desire to respond, and in that space, they opt for peace over pattern. Meditation heightens this skill, like exercising a muscle you didn't know you possessed. The first time you sit and breathe, it may seem like nothing's going on, but it is. Gradually, your nervous system learns to break the panic habit. Gradually, your thoughts lose their hold on your identity. And gradually, your soul recovers what stillness means when it no longer tries to manipulate everything. Stillness is not detachment from life. It's living life wholeheartedly without inner resistance. You experience the sorrow, but you don't drown. You experience the fear, but you don't flee. You experience the joy, but you don't grasp. All is permitted to come and go, like weather, like waves, like breath. And sometimes quietness has nothing to do with the mind. It begins in the body. The body that carries tension as a second skin that tightens in old defense, even when no danger approaches. Meditation is also a coming back to the body, an opportunity to experience what has been accumulated there. And when you breathe into those spaces, not attempting to heal, just to sense, something is released. The storm within begins to pass, and in that space, your authentic presence is restored. There is a peace that no outside circumstance can touch. That's what Buddhist practice safeguards. It doesn't rely on quietude of surroundings or ideal conditions. It's the type of peace that remains when plans fall through, when others walk away, when the world turns quiet. A peace that resides in the breath, not in the result. The intention isn't to be some unfeeling statue. It's to feel all things and still be grounded. To sense every high and low and yet have a sense of home within you. To come back again and again to the breath. Not because it's an escape, but because it's the only place life actually occurs. Everything else is memory or projection. Even the Buddha was tempted by storms. Mara, the tempter, the internal voice of distraction and fear, came to him many times, but he didn't resist Mara. He sat with him. He said, "I see you, Mara." And in the recognition, without resistance, the storm passed. This is the teaching. What you resist owns you. What you permit loses its hold. Stillness is not the lack of movement. It's the lack of being moved by things that don't matter. It's the strength to feel profoundly without breaking. It's the softness that doesn't yield to fear. And once it's built, it becomes your armor, not from life, but from the delusion that you must control life. This is why stillness is learned prior to wisdom, because otherwise the mind cannot see. Without it, emotion colors perception. But with stillness, even madness is a teacher. Even pain is sacred. So the practice goes on. One breath, one moment, again and again. No perfection necessary. No need to accomplish anything. Simply be. Let the thoughts arise. Let them pass. Don't chase. Don't push away. Sit like quiet water under the storm. And when the day is done, when the world grows still, come back again. Not to change your life, but to meet it entirely. To ground yourself in something more than mind. To recall that no matter how loud the world becomes, the authentic sanctuary isn't out there. It's already within you, waiting. Let the surface be what it will. The storm can rage, the clouds can thicken, but your breath stays, your presence stays. Your awareness, gentle and persistent, is still here. That's all you require. And that is all. And when the storm no longer frightens, when quiet is no longer foreign, something else comes into view. The fear was never really about randomness. It was about control. The true unease was never the din. It was the possibility that life would not turn out the way you hoped, that results could slip through your fingers, that plans could fall apart. And so the mind holds on, not because it is powerful, but because it is afraid. This is where we move from soothing the waves to releasing the desire to control the current. Because peace is not merely remaining stationary in the tempest. It's letting go of the string that binds your joy to the way things turn out. There is a moment in every life that seems like breaking. A job is lost. A dream falls apart. A love affair ends. And in that moment, something breaks. The mind scrambles to attach a word to it. Failure, rejection, defeat. But what if those moments weren't the destruction of something precious, but the escape from something already constraining you? What if the thread that snapped was never doing its job to keep you safe, but its job to keep you pinned? This is the essence of non-attachment, not shoving life aside, not becoming apathetic, but releasing the hold. Knowing that pursuing certain results tends to tie you to suffering you do not even see. Buddhism says this softly but firmly. It is not the thing you desire, but your clinging to it that brings pain. It begins early, the idea that achievement equals control, that joy relies on things unfolding as they should, and so the string tightens. Expectations ensnare the heart like twine. I'll be fine if I receive this promotion. I'll be loved if they remain. I'll be worthy if I succeed. Then the world does what the world does. It shifts, and when the thread breaks, the hurt is more than we can bear. But stop. Breathe. Look once more. That shattering wasn't the end of your peace. It was the start of your freedom. The kite doesn't fall when the thread breaks. It takes off, because it was never the string that let it soar. It was the breeze, and the breeze, like life, is uncontrollable, but it can take you somewhere new if you let go. Non-attachment is not about not caring. It's about not needing. You can still love with intensity, attempt with courage, dream with abandon, but you don't anchor yourself to the outcome. You give your all to the moment, and then you release it. You do the work, but not the result. You arrive completely, but allow life to greet you as it wishes. This is not weakness. This is strength without tension, a sort of inner gentleness that cannot be shattered, because it is not clinging to begin with. Buddhist teachings refer to this as upadana, grasping. It's the tendency of the mind to hang on to what it thinks it must live, and that's praise, status, certainty. But the more you cling, the smaller your identity becomes around the thing you're clinging to, and the more you fear losing it. But when the thread breaks, when the relationship dissolves, the plan falls apart, the door slams. That's the opening, not into despair, but into space. Because in the emptiness that comes after, something deeper starts to rise up. You begin to pay attention to the part of you that's not bound by success, that's not broken by rejection, that doesn't vanish when things don't work out. That part is the sky. All else was just a fleeting cloud. Failure is a gift when you no longer define yourself by results. Because when something you've planned goes wrong, it shows you everything you hadn't yet realized. It shows you attachments you didn't even know you had. It illustrates the difference between effort and control, and it allows you to start over. not from the same starting point, but from a deeper place. The Buddha said, "We have expectations that are like strings. They reach from our mind to the unpredictability of the world, tying your peace to it. But when you start to cut those strings, not with violence, but with understanding, your peace comes home. Not because the world changed, but because you quit asking it to complete you. Non-attachment is not resignation. It's participating without possession. It's telling me I surrender to this moment and meaning it even when the outcome shatters your heart. Because when you no longer tie your self-worth to results, your heart doesn't shatter the same way anymore. It opens, and yeah, there will still be hurt. Letting go does not eliminate grief, but grief without attachment moves. It breathes, it heals, it teaches. Where attachment stops time, it generates stories that shouldn't have occurred, and those stories become prisons. But if you desist from insisting on things continuing to exist forever, all becomes more lovely. The love, the work, the danger, it all gets consecrated because you're not holding on to the outcome. You're respecting the instant. You're living, not trading with life for assurances. This is why a lot of individuals feel disoriented after achievement. They achieved what they had desired, but the fabric was too tight. They became their accomplishment. And when the applause wore off, they didn't recognize who they were anymore. But the person who dwells without attachment does not get lost because their peace wasn't borrowed. It was constructed. It's a different life. You begin to ask better questions. Not will this play out exactly as I desire, but what is this moment requiring of me? Not will they grant approval, but am I moving from truth? Not will I succeed or fail, but did I arrive with presence? And from there you start to notice the deeper freedom, because every snapped strand is an opening. Every lost ending is a return to self. And each so-called failure is a space where something lighter, truer can start. You begin to travel through life like a kite without strings, still controlled by intention, still caressed by the wind, but not captive to where you alight. You have faith that what is meant for you will arrive, and what departs from you was never yours to begin with. Not in a harsh sense, but in a wise one. The more you practice this, the more you sense it in your body. The hold in your belly relaxes. The constriction in your chest releases. You breathe more slowly because the nervous system also gets tired of holding on. It never was meant to be tense all the time. It yearns to be unbound. And when folks ask what shifted, you won't tell them. I stopped caring. You'll tell them. I began living without requiring everything to be my way. You'll tell them. I ceased judging my worth by things beyond my control. You'll tell them. I let go of the thread, and I did not plummet. I soared. That's the paradox. The instant that you give up attempting to manage life, you start living it completely, intensely, without dread. Because freedom is not in holding on tighter. It's in letting go. Not carelessly, but intentionally. Like the breath that escapes without hesitation. Like the thought that flies without judgment. Like the kite that soars when the wind invites it forward. Not when the string keeps it tethered to safety. And so tonight, as you sleep, allow yourself to sense what you've been holding on to. Allow yourself to label it. The result you're still trying to impose. The conclusion you have not come to terms with. The dream you believed you could not do without. And with every breath, loosen the thread softly. Say softly to yourself, even if it doesn't work out the way I imagined, I will be all right. Even if the plan changes, I will still make my way. Even if this chapter closes, I believe what is to come. Let those words sit deep into your bones. Allow your breath to bring them through your body. And if feeling comes, let it. You're not broken. You're letting go of what was never yours to begin with. Sleep will become softer now. Not because all things are sure, but because you don't require it to be anymore. The string has been pulled apart, and for the first time, you are free. And when the string breaks, and you get up rather than drop, something strange occurs. You see that perhaps it wasn't failure after all. Perhaps it was life redirecting your path, not punishing you, but cleansing what you were holding onto. But even once the thread has broken, even once you have released the result, there's still something deeper the mind wishes to attempt. Hold on to what's already gone by. Attempt to retain what's already escaping. Attempt to scoop water with a bowl made of cracks. This is where so many get stuck, holding on to that which was never intended to remain. The next thing is to cease attempting to hold on to the rain. Certain things are not stolen from you. They merely pass through you, such as rain upon a roof. It falls, it touches, it departs. And yet, how many times does the mind attempt to hold on to the non-holdable? A second of joy, a sense of love, a part of yourself that no longer belongs. The bowl fills up, and rather than drink, you attempt to freeze the water. You wish to retain it, save it, preserve it, but rain is not supposed to be stationary. That is not what it does, and Buddhism teaches us neither is life. The hurt is not from the rain moving on. It arises out of the understanding that it must not. Suffering arises when the bowl attempts to be permanent, when it loses sight of why its purpose isn't to hold forever, but to receive completely and then release. This is the teaching of impermanence. Anicca, one of the Buddha's main teachings. Everything shifts. Everything flows. Everything dissolves, not because something's amiss, but because change is the nature of all things. The leaves of the tree fall off. The river finds a new course. The breath departs the body and returns in another. But the mind that is conditioned in fear resists this reality. It desires permanence in a world that does not give it any. Why? Because permanence is safety. It provides a sense of control. But that safety is imprisonment. When you attempt to hold the rain, you no longer get to have the rain. You lose sense of it. You lose touch with it. You're so busy holding on to it that you forget to allow it to feed you before it's gone. This attachment manifests everywhere, in relationships that are already over, in characters you don't need to be anymore, in iterations of yourself that don't feel alive anymore. The bowl is unfilled, yet you're still looking at it, wondering why you feel thirsty. That profound ache that arises when something precious is lost. Buddhism doesn't require you to suppress grief. It requires you to get it, to notice that grief isn't an indicator that something was a mistake, but an indicator that something was important. It says, "This touched me, and now it's gone." And in that empty space, something holy is exposed. Not the hurt of loss, but the loveliness of having loved in the first place. When you let go of the need to hold on, you start living lighter. You start greeting moments with open hands instead of clenched fists. You give up trying to catch joy as a firefly in a jar, and you let it dance instead, knowing that the dance will do. The bowl that failed to contain the rain is not shattered. It is knowing. It understands that to contain something for all eternity is to lose what it truly is. Nothing remains. And that is not tragedy. It's freedom. The terror of impermanence is from forgetting that you too are part of the flow. You are not outside of the changing world. You are not an object in time. You are time itself. Passing, shifting, becoming. Every breath you breathe is evidence that you are a process, not a possession. The self you hold on to is already lost, already becoming something else. That does not mean nothing matters. It means all things matter more, because it won't last, because you won't pass this way again. So you learn to love not by owning, but by being present. Learn to appreciate not by collecting, but by noticing. Learn to live not by holding, but by flowing. Same with success, with happiness. To those perfect days that seem too good to end, if you hold on to them, they rot. But if you feel them fully, they leave a trace, an actual trace. Not something remembered in a dusty past, but something living in the way you move forward. The most wonderful moments don't have to be retained. They mold you by traveling through you. Impermanence also alters your relationship with suffering. When you realize all things pass, even suffering is less daunting. The panic eases. You no longer tell yourself, this will never end. You tell yourself, this too will shift, and you can breathe once more. There is a strength that goes deeper than the surface when you realize that you can let go. Not because you've lost feeling, but because you've gained wisdom, because you've learned that the tighter you cling, the more you lose. But the more you give, the more you live. It's a different kind of courage. The courage to feel everything without needing to freeze it in place. The courage to love fully, even when you know it will change. The courage to enjoy the moment without needing to capture it. The camera can't hold the sunlight. The bowl can't keep the rain. And that's okay. Stillness is easier when you stop trying to stop the flow. Peace is nearer when you stop asking life to remain static. The petals will drop. The song will end. The warmth will die. But what lingers is presence. Presence that touches all, even as it grasps nothing. And when the rain returns, you don't attempt to grasp it. You let it fall on you. You feel it. You smile. You say, thank you. And when it goes, you don't pursue it. You remain stationary. You inhale. You wait for whatever follows. That's the new beat. The bowl's power doesn't lie in what it holds. It lies in how freely it releases, how prepared it is to hold again. Life gets generous when you no longer keep what's supposed to move through. And then there's room. Room for the new, space for the actual, space for what is actually present. Attachment whispers, don't leave. Wisdom whispers, thank you for visiting. Fear whispers, what if it alters? Trust whispers, of course it will. And love, authentic love, whispers, let it flow. This is not letting go. It is awakening. Awakening to the reality that you were never intended to be a keeper of rain. You were supposed to sense it, be molded by it, and then release it. Allow that to settle in now in the stillness, in the breath. Whatever you're still holding on to, perhaps it is time to allow it to wash through. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough to let go of resisting the flow. The bowl is not empty, it's prepared, and so are you. And when you release the rain, when you embrace the fact that there are things that were never supposed to remain, you start seeing something even quieter. The echoes, not the shattering pain of what is lost, but the whispery hurt of what was never completed. Not the pain of loss, but the discontent of incompleteness. These are the echoes that reverberate inside the head long after the moment has passed. Endless conversations that never ended properly. Answers that never arrived. Never spoken apologies. And for some, the true pain isn't in the event. It's in the never-ending search for closure. But what if closure isn't something you discover? What if it's something you no longer require? Some things in life are not accompanied by answers. Some goodbyes are not provided with endings. Some departures are made without saying goodbye. And some questions linger without answers for a year or an eternity. But the mind doesn't appreciate that. It spirals. It repeats. It insists on knowing. It goes back through the past like a detective, hunting for one additional clue, one additional thread, one additional motive. And every time the answer doesn't surface, the process starts all over again. That is the echo. Not the event itself, but the mind's reaching to solve something that was never intended to be solved. Buddhism invites us to look at this clearly, to look at how frequently the need for closure is simply one more form of control. It's the reach to clean up a story that life left hanging open, to place a period where the sentence simply trailed off. But not all stories conclude as we'd wish them to. Some simply cease, and the peace we're looking for isn't in the ending, it's in the letting go. The echo that persists to pursue its voice dwells in the past. It's the portion of the mind that thinks if it can simply think hard enough, it will finally comprehend. But comprehension does not always equal peace, and peace does not necessarily come through understanding. Often the most profound healing occurs not through solving it, but through permission to just keep going without it. It doesn't mean you don't acknowledge what's happened. It means you do stop letting it be the measuring stick for your current. The past isn't going to rewrite itself, and pursuing the echoes won't lead you closer to truth. It will merely lead you further away from presence. There are things you ought to hear, but never did. Things you wished someone would explain, but never were able. There are scars that still cut when provoked, but healing doesn't necessitate closing all the loops. It means learning how to stand in the silence of the unresolved and remain intact. Meditation teaches this softly. When the thought comes back, an echo, you see it, you say it, and you let it go. You don't struggle against it. You don't nourish it. You don't pursue it. You sit. You breathe. You let go. Gazing at it disperses its hold. Some of these echoes belong to identity. Why did they leave? Why was I not enough? What could I have done differently? But Buddhist practice teaches us that the self is not static. It's not a solid building. It's a series of moments transforming, moving. And once you release the desire to define yourself through an unfinished story, your identity is fluid once more, unencumbered, no longer trapped in that one moment that continues to replay. It's not easy. The mind will hold on, but closure will release me to let go. I just want to know why, but that desire is a trap, because even when you do finally get the answer, it doesn't take away the pain, and more often than not, it only serves to raise more questions. True closure doesn't come from out there. It comes from in here. It comes from saying, even if I never do get the answer, I choose to forgive the silence. That applies to betrayal, to abandonment, to choices other people made that touched you profoundly. You might never know why someone hurt you, You may never know why they shifted, but healing doesn't need their explanation. It needs you to stop waiting. You can be whole without the apology. You can be free without the clarity, because peace is not a gift they give you. It's something you take when you break free from relying on them to heal what they hurt. This lesson is not about escaping sorrow. It's about finishing it, allowing it to do its job without carrying it into every subsequent day. The sorrow turns to suffering when it becomes identity, when the echo starts to be a soundtrack you live by. But you are greater than what occurred. You are more than the silence they left you in. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to stop hoping for a return. Some echoes are not signs. They're just noise. Let them fade. Buddhist teachings say that clinging to what is gone is like reaching for a reflection in the water. The more you grasp, the more distorted it becomes. But if you keep still, the picture settles, and in that clarity you no longer require the reflection to hold you. You stabilize on your own. This doesn't imply you forget. It implies you decide not to remain tangled. It implies you view the story for what it was, uncompleted, flawed, human, and you let it stay where it needs to be, in the past. Closure is not a door someone closes for you. It's a door you just stop waiting at. A door you leave, not because you lost interest, but because you care too much about your own serenity to wait anymore. You will still get echoes periodically. That's fine. Let them come. Let them go. Do not respond to them. Do not chase after them. Don't give it your breath. Give your breath to the now, to what's still possible, to what's real. Every time you do, the echo grows weaker, not because it diminishes, but because you no longer nourish it. You no longer think that it contains the missing piece. You see that you were never missing anything in the first place. Buddhism reminds us that everything arises and passes away. That are thoughts, feelings, sounds, stories. The mind will attempt to bring them back, but the path of practice is to learn to look through that. To look through that, not everything which comes back is to be re-entered again. Some things need to be let go over and over until one day they no longer come back. And even if they do, you are no longer disturbed by them. They are echoes, not commands, not truths, not destinations, mere residual sound from a voice that's gone. Not by repairing the past, but by no longer pursuing it. You stand in the now. You decide not to turn around. You allow the echo to echo, and you remain where you are. So tonight, if something comes back, something you regret, a name, a voice you miss, greet it gently. Then let it go. Tell yourself, I don't need to hear the end to make peace with the tale, and leave it at that. You are not broken because something was left open. You are not unworthy because someone didn't clarify. You are not unfinished because life didn't tie the bow. The echo does not have to be replied to. It must be let go. And when the echo no longer tugs you back, when the questions that go unanswered start to fade, you're left with something even more difficult to confront. The fragments of your past that you do remember, the things you don't want to have said, the decisions that haunt you in the silence, the moments you relive not because they're unresolved, but because they're painful. And that is where another illusion resides. Not in the questioning, but in believing that time somehow can be reversed. That if you think hard enough, regret long enough, you can erase what's been done. But time does not reverse, and the clock never ticks backward. There is a weight to regret that is distinct from sorrow. Sorrow hurts for what was lost. Regret torments for what could have been. It is based not on memory, but on comparison between the actual and the potential, between what is and what may have been. And the more the mind nourishes it, the more it moves away from being present. Regret is the narrative that goes, "You should have known better. You could have done more. You ruined everything." But Buddhist teachings encourage you to ask, who is this voice serving, and what is it helping you become? If the past were reversible by thinking about it, you would have done so by now. Regret doesn't alter history. Regret rewrites identity. It makes you believe that just because something did go wrong, you're wrong. It reduces the whole self to one moment, one error, one failure. But the Dharma is here to tell us that the self is not a fixed object. It's always evolving. What you did then was what a part of you that doesn't even exist anymore did. That person made a different choice, out of a different space, different knowing, different fear, different necessity. And keeping today's self hostage for yesterday's choice only traps you in a prison constructed of shadows. Freedom does not lie in pretending that none of it happened. It's accepting it without attachment, accepting it as a chapter, not a sentence. It's recognizing that wisdom is not born in perfection. It is sculpted out of mistake. It is formed by the tension between who you used to be and who you are currently attempting to become. The Buddha didn't instruct individuals to wipe out their past. He instructed them on how to put an end to hanging on to it, and it starts with presence. Because regret cannot exist where there is presence, the more you occupy this present, the more difficult it is for the mind to pull you back, such as attempting to move forward while only looking at the back view mirror. You lose your balance, your direction, your peace. Presence is not passivity. It's not merely being in the now. It is a practice, a choice, a coming again and again. Each time the past beckons your name, presence responds first with breath, with knowing, with a gentle reminder that is no longer real. This is the body wears regret like a burden. It cannot shake, shoulders constrict, chest collapses, the breath grows shallow. That's why meditation is such a potent antidote. It doesn't erase regret cognitively. It melts it energetically. With every breath, you're informing your nervous system. You are no longer there. You are safe here. And gradually the body starts to trust it. Time is movement, and suffering results when you attempt to arrest it. When you exist in your mind where your body has already gone. Buddhist teachings equate this to someone carrying water in a cracked vessel. No matter the caution, the water continues leaking since it cannot be contained. The past will not remain, and your assignment is not to scoop it up, but to see the stream and move forward. Guilt can masquerade as responsibility. I owe them this feeling of remorse. I must carry this so I won't forget. But guilt isn't growth. Carrying pain doesn't pay a debt. It merely multiplies suffering. Real accountability is not in punishing myself. It's in changing. It's in becoming a person who wouldn't have made that decision a second time. That is redemption, and it exists in moving forward, not in mental replay. The mind sometimes doesn't even regret something you've done. It regrets something that was done to you, and yet it still manages to blame you. You should have left earlier. You should have recognized the signs. But that is another attachment, not to someone or some result, but to the thought that you were meant to be perfect, that somehow you ought to have understood then what only hindsight reveals. That is not wisdom. That is cruelty, and has no business in a mind practiced in compassion. Buddhist practice instills that time is not linear. It's lived in through attention. If your mind resides in the past, you are there, not bodily, but emotionally. And until you reclaim your attention, you're scattered. But presence brings you together. It brings your energy back into the now. And in that return, peace becomes available once more. There's a saying in the Zen tradition, let go or be dragged. Regret drags, not because the past is alive, but because your attachment to it is. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about unhooking. It means saying, yes, that happened, but I do not have to keep living it. The truth is every moment you spend regretting is a moment you don't spend living. Every breath focused on what was is a breath stolen from what is. And the only place transformation happens is here. In this moment, in this inhale, in this step, even when the regret feels overwhelming, ask yourself this: is this thought healing me or merely holding me in suffering? If not, you can let it go gently, not in denial, but in love of your own peace. You might still feel it at times. That's okay. Let it arise. Let it be witnessed. Then let it go. You are not your history. You are the one observing it drift by. And the more you watch without grasping, the freer you become. Time moves in one way only. The river does not go back. And the more you move in this direction, the calmer becomes your natural state. Not because nothing hurts, but because you no longer work against the way life goes. If you want to respect the past, don't linger there. Live better now. Speak with greater kindness. Act with greater consciousness. Give more willingly. Be more completely awake in each decision. That is how you make regret sacred. Not by holding on, but by transfiguration. The clock does not turn back, but you are not behind schedule. You are precisely where you must be to begin anew. So tonight, when the thoughts arise, let them arise. Don't debate. Don't justify. Simply say that was then. This is now, and back to the breath. Over and over again until the mind ceases resisting time and starts to go with it. Allow the clock to tick forward. Allow yourself to go along with it. And once you've come to terms with the fact that time will not go backward, that all your power lies in how you approach this moment, you begin to notice another level of attachment that oftentimes lies in plain sight. Expectations. They're not loud like regret. They're not sharp like loss. They come quietly, masquerading as hope, as planning, as thinking responsibly. But if left unrestrained, they turn into a weight. And for most, the pressure does not come from what is occurring. It comes from what was to occur. It's here that potential gets submerged before it even starts growing. Not through a lack of trying, but through not being willing to release the rain that you believed would nourish you. There's a seed in every one of us. There's a potential that isn't realized by coercion. It isn't cultivated by knowing. It unfurls when the time is right, but the mind doesn't like that. The mind likes control, so it adds water. Too much water. It overflows the ground with expectation. It tells the seed when to bloom, how to appear, and what it has to be. And during that flooding, the seed cannot breathe. The very thing that was intended to feed instead suffocates. Expectations differ from goals. Goals flow with ease. They accommodate change. Expectations insist. They dictate this is how it should be. And when it is not, the mind attacks itself. It accuses, it questions, it senses failure, where there was perhaps only deflection. Buddhism teaches us that pain results not from what is, but from the space between what is and what was anticipated. That space becomes a war zone, a location where the present moment is not lived but likened to a reflection that perhaps never even existed in the first place. It occurs in tiny increments. The day does not unfold as intended. A talk does not proceed as you wished. You are off, weary, out of sync. And at once the mind declares something is amiss. But perhaps nothing is amiss. Perhaps the sole issue is that the instant did not fit the inner script, and the script never was life. It was a notion, a projection, an image that never sought permission to be real. The issue with expectations is that they narrow the scope of possibility. They provide a very tight definition of success, of love, of happiness, and anything that doesn't fit that definition becomes failure, even if it isn't. The seed might be developing roots when you're expecting flowers. It might be building strength while you're expecting outcomes. And in that disconnect, frustration arises. But release alters everything. Surrender is not weakness. It's alignment. It's when the mind no longer wrestles with the moment and starts to listen. When the inner turmoil dissolves and you see that something is still growing even in the absence of your relentless prodding. The seed that flowered was the one left to itself, the one that got just enough and was trusted to do the rest. Your life is not a machine that has to be pushed. It is something that unfolds, something that begs to be seen. And your potential is not something you need to fight for. It's something that comes through when you cease drowning it in what you believe needs to be. Expectations tend to be rooted in fear. Fear that if you do not create a plan, you will fall behind. Fear that without control, you will be erased. But the deeper reality is this: nothing that's real is ever lost. What's yours doesn't need to be micromanaged. It needs space. It needs faith. A stillness of confidence that something holy is happening in the silence. This is true for creativity, for love, for growth. The more you anticipate, the less you notice, because your eyes aren't open to what is. They're looking for what you believed would be there, and in that scanning, you miss the beauty that doesn't appear in your picture. Buddhist mindfulness challenges you to greet each moment with new eyes, to release the lens of assumption, to cease expecting today to resemble yesterday's vision board. The flower doesn't bloom because you scream at it. It blooms when it's ready, and that readiness isn't always apparent. It often appears like stillness, like nothing's happening. But beneath the roots are growing stronger. The foundation is becoming deeper. The timing is revealing itself. When you let go of expectations, you begin to move in a new way. You become inquisitive rather than controlling, expansive rather than contracted, thankful rather than entitled. And that change alters your energy. Others can sense it. Life reacts to it. Doors open that were not previously seen, not because they didn't exist, but because your expectations were blinding you. Even with yourself, the same principle holds. Expectation builds pressure. Pressure builds resistance. Resistance builds stagnation. But self-compassion builds movement. And movement, when given, always moves forward. You don't need to command perfection to grow. You just need to let what's real grow. There is an old Zen teaching: let go or get dragged. But there is also this surrender. and you will see what's already functioning. You'll notice that perhaps you were never behind. Perhaps nothing is lacking. Perhaps the very thing that you thought would be lost was never meant to remain. And in the releasing, the seed finally exhales, and the rain once let go becomes sustenance rather than deluge. This does not equate to not dreaming. This does not equate to not caring. This equates to not clinging. You journey with purpose, but without fixation. You trust your steps without having to see the whole way. You keep your vision lightly, like a candle, not a chain. Releasing expectation also heals relationships, because people are not intended to live out your script. They are intended to be lived. And the more you want them to be a certain way, love you in a certain way, agree with you in every single way, the more tension you build. But when you greet them with presence, with curiosity, with space to be themselves, something more emerges: deep connection, authentic love, unforced acceptance. And when expectations let go, disappointment releases, not because you don't love, but because you no longer compare everything to a strict standard. You learn to be flexible, not flexible from weakness, but resilient from trust, like bamboo in the wind, unbroken. The rain will come again, the plans will change again, but your peace of mind no longer hinges on precise timing. It hinges on your willingness, and the more willing you are, the more surprises life can offer you. The type that expectations would have shut out. The type that look like miracle. Not because they're infrequent, but because you're finally able to perceive them. So tonight, pay attention to where the rain has been dense, where your mind is filled with should. By now it was meant to see how much energy it took. And with each breath, start to let it out. Not all at once, just quietly. Little by little, tell yourself the seed will flower. When it's time, I don't need to push what's already happening. Let that settle in your bones. Let the tightness release your shoulders. Let the breath remind you that you are not behind, not broken, not late. You are evolving in ways that you have yet to understand. Let go of the rain. Let the seed breathe and see what begins to grow. And when the seed is finally left to grow without constraint, when you no longer insist that the rain fall on your timeline, something else comes into focus. Life doesn't have to be pushed forward. What takes care and grows stronger. What breathes without tension breathes deeper. But that doesn't mean you have no strength. It means your strength is not what you imagined. Not domination, not pushing, not forcing others and the world to obey your will. It's something gentler, something wiser, like the wind. Not controlling, but guiding. Not forcing, but moving with purpose. Here lies the Buddhist doctrine of skillful means. Control without domination is not weakness. It is mastery. Mastery of the art of moving through existence without attaching to results, speaking without having to win, acting without attempting to overpower. This is the wind that carries. The presence that changes without shouting. The power that changes not by pressure but by resonance. In Buddhism, this is referred to as apaya. Skillful means not what you do, but how you do it. The tone of voice behind your words, the intention behind your decisions, the consciousness behind your actions. You can say the correct thing in the incorrect manner and harm. You can utter a truth with arrogance and forfeit the heart of it. But if the heart is pure, if the ego has withdrawn, even the smallest word can move mountains. Skillful means are founded upon listening not only to others but to the moment itself. What does this moment require? Not what do I desire to occur, but what is truly wise here. Often the response is silence. Sometimes it's action. Sometimes it's waiting. And choosing which one is appropriate comes not from control, but connection. Control attempts to force everything into a shape. Skillful action reacts to what is already happening. Control goes against the flow. Wisdom becomes able to ride it. This appears in dialogue. When there is disagreement, the reactive mind wants to argue, to prove, to overpower. But the skillful mind stops. It observes. It questions. Is this about truth or control? Is this answer about clarity or about being right? And within the space of that moment, space opens. A breath comes back. The wind blows not as a storm, but as a breeze, gentle yet strong. Even in relationships, there is a distinction. Control dictates change, so I can feel safe. Influence insists I will demonstrate calm, and that possibly might change something in you. Control requires. Wisdom provides. Control dictates that this is the way it should be. The wind dictates, let me blow around you with you to something better. The power of the wind lies in the way it flows without attachment. It is directional when necessary. It doesn't remain static in one course. It conforms. It flexes without breaking. This is not being passive. It is being responsive. And in that responsiveness, there is profound intelligence. You cease to respond from habit and begin responding from presence. Even the Buddha employed skillful means. He didn't speak the same way to everyone. He met each person where they were. Some needed soft words. Others needed firm correction. Some needed stories. Others needed silence. His wisdom wasn't in providing one answer to all. It was in sensing the energy of the moment and responding naturally to it. Effective influence starts with releasing the need for control. It invites you to have faith that you don't need to push your way ahead. You don't need to control to be heard. You don't need to overpower to be effective. When your presence is stable, your influence unfolds naturally. Control generates resistance. The harder you push, the harder people push back. But when your energy is peaceful, grounded, and threat-free, people relax. Not always at first, but over time, because the quality of being present is something that gets transferred, and the influence derived from being present extends longer than the power created from being controlling. This is not necessarily about other people. It's about how you are with yourself. Control manifests in your own internal talk. The critical voice, the strict demands, the relentless self-blame. But skillful means have relevance there as well. What if you shaped your own evolution with compassion? What if you directed yourself lightly like the wind guiding a sailboat? Not pulling, not drowning, just calm guidance. When the mind is too aggressive, even your positive intentions feel burdensome. But when your energy resonates with patience and clarity, movement feels more spontaneous. You don't need to coerce discipline. You create the conditions where discipline feels welcome. You don't have to fight for growth. You become the ground where growth happens on its own. This kind of influence can't be faked. It comes from consistency, from your practice, from how you meet yourself in the quiet. When you're comfortable with not dominating every moment, you acquire the strength to navigate life without destroying it. Skillful action is unobtrusive. It's the gentle voice that diffuses rage. the deep breath that quiets a fretful thought, the choice to recede when the mind urges to push forward. It's not the loudest object in the room, but it ends up being the most effective. Even in management, the greatest influence is based on consistency. Individuals don't follow power, they follow simplicity. And simplicity emerges when you no longer must control everything. You believe in the direction, you adapt as necessary. You go as wind, existing, adaptable, directed. This holds for teaching, for parenting, for curing. You can't change someone, but you can make space for change to feel safe. You can't coerce growth, but you can eliminate the pressure that prevents it. That is true power. Not the power to control, but the power to bear. So how do you practice this? Through mindfulness, through observing your own energy. When the push urge comes up, ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What would be the result if I did not force this? What if I let go of timing rather than forcing it? Every time you override the desire to overpower, you build your inner wind. You practice guiding with less resistance, touching without grabbing, moving without crashing. This isn't inaction, it's precise action, like a feather falling in just the right spot, like a hand reaching only when it's truly needed, like words spoken at just the right volume to be heard, not shouted. The more you practice this, the more you begin to notice. People trust you more. They open up more, not because you told them to, but because your energy says they can. Influence grows from safety, not force. Even when things go wrong, skillful means help you recover. You don't panic. You respond. You shift. You become the wind again. Not clinging to how it was supposed to go, but adjusting to how it is now. Let yourself be that wind. Let yourself move with clarity, not control. Let your presence speak louder than your pressure. Let your influence grow from how deeply you listen, not how hard you push. So tonight, breathe into the places where you've been trying too hard. The conversations you've tried to steer, the outcomes you've tried to force, the habits you've demanded to change overnight. And with each breath, soften. Let the pressure release. Let your energy adjust. Say to yourself, I can guide without gripping. I can move without controlling. I can influence with calm. And with that, let your presence deepen. And once you stop trying to steer the wind, once you release the urge to guide every outcome, you're left with the most difficult truth of all. Sometimes there's no clear path at all, no map, no signs, no confirmation that you're moving the right way. Just forward, just breath, just step. And this is where real trust is forged. Not trust in plans, not trust in outcomes, but trust in the Dharma itself. The deeper law beneath your fears, the quiet knowing that even when the path disappears under your feet, there's still a way forward. There's a moment in life when clarity vanishes, when all the certainty that held you collapses, you lose the job. The relationship ends. The next step you thought was solid turns to mist, and the mind panics because it was trained to walk only when the ground was visible. But the Dharma teaches otherwise. It teaches that sometimes the next step must be taken without a guarantee, not recklessly, not blindly, but with presence, with humility, with the understanding that not seeing the road doesn't mean the journey has ended. This is what it means to cultivate faith, not blind belief, but grounded trust. Faith that if you stay rooted in awareness, the next step will reveal itself, that the Dharma, universal truth, natural law, moves even when you can't see it. That reality is unfolding with wisdom. Even if that wisdom feels like uncertainty, the mind resists this deeply. It wants security. It wants control. It wants to know that each step leads somewhere safe. But security is often just a habit, not a truth. And control is usually just anxiety in disguise. The more we cling to what's visible, the more we suffer when it disappears. But the teachings show another way. Walk anyway. This kind of walking is not mechanical. It's devotional. Each step becomes a practice, a moment of listening, a reminder that clarity is not a requirement for movement, that the unknown is not the enemy. It's the place where life is still alive, where possibility still exists. To walk without a visible path is to live from the inside out. It's to stop relying on outer conditions to tell you what's right. It's to start listening to what doesn't shout. The breath, the body, the stillness beneath the thoughts. These become your compass when the old map burns. And yes, fear will rise. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of wasting time. Fear of being lost. But fear is not a stop sign. It's just a signal, a moment of tightening. And when you see it, you don't retreat. You breathe through it. You soften into it. You take the step anyway. The Buddha never promised a clear path. He promised freedom. And freedom often looks like standing in the dark with your eyes open. No longer searching for a spotlight, just learning how to walk with your own light, no matter how small. This applies to every transition. When one chapter ends and the next hasn't begun, when the identity you once had no longer fits and the new one hasn't taken shape, these liminal spaces are sacred. Not because they feel good, but because they're real, raw, honest. They strip away illusion and leave you face to face with yourself. And this is where practice becomes more than theory. This is where all the meditation, all the letting go, all the awareness is tested. Can you stay with yourself when nothing else stays? Can you keep walking when even the path beneath your feet has vanished? This is not about endurance. It's about presence. You don't rush through the unknown. You don't try to outthink it. You meet it fully. You let it shape you. You become the kind of person who doesn't just survive uncertainty, but becomes more alive in it. Because when the path disappears, distractions fall away. You can't rely on autopilot. You have to wake up. You have to look closely. Listen deeply. Respond from your core, not your conditioning. And in doing so, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust, not the path, but your capacity to walk. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is true right now?" That becomes your next step. Truth, not comfort, certainty. Truth. And the more you walk in truth, the more you see that every step taken in awareness becomes a path. The Dharma is not something outside of you. It's not a doctrine. It's the rhythm beneath all things. The quiet intelligence in breath, in death, in rebirth, in stillness. And when the ground disappears, the Dharma remains like gravity, like sky, like breath. This doesn't mean you won't feel lost. It means you stop fearing lostness. You stop making it mean failure. You start seeing it as part of the way. Because the map was never the journey. The path was never the point. The point was who you become when there's nothing left to hold on to but your own awareness. Even in daily life, this teaching applies. You don't always know what's next. You don't always feel ready. The conversation is hard, the decision unclear, the future unpredictable. But still, you can step with kindness, with courage, with the understanding that movement itself is clarity. Letting go of needing to see the path doesn't mean acting without care. It means acting without control. It means making choices not from desperation, but from alignment, not from fear, but from faith. And each time you do, you become less attached to outcome and more committed to truth. And over time, this becomes a way of being. You stop panicking when the map dissolves. You stop searching for guarantees. You trust that your presence is the path, that each step lived with mindfulness is enough, that walking into the unknown is not a flaw, it's part of the design. Even when others doubt you, when the world demands certainty, you stay steady. You don't need to explain your path, you just need to walk it. With each breath, with each step, you reaffirm, I may not know where this leads, but I trust how I'm walking. Let yourself walk like that tonight. Let yourself breathe through the uncertainty. You don't need to know everything. You just need to stay here, present, honest, willing to move without a script, willing to let the Dharma carry you even when your mind cannot see the road. And when you've learned to walk, even when the ground disappears, when each step is no longer a demand for clarity, but a quiet act of trust, there's something even deeper that begins to awaken. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it doesn't need to be forced into the moment. It's already here. It's always been here. The bell doesn't need to be struck to ring. It rings from within, and the sound comes only when everything else goes still. This is where wisdom begins, not as an achievement, but as a natural unfolding that happens the moment control finally lets go. There's a kind of knowing that doesn't come from thinking. It doesn't arrive through effort or analysis. It's not something you figure out. It's something that rises when space is made for it. But most of the time, the space is filled with plans, with opinions, with strategies and mental rehearsals. The bell of inner truth waits in silence. But the mind rarely leaves enough quiet to hear it. So it stays silent, not because it's absent, but because it's drowned out. Buddhist teachings point to this again and again. The wisdom you seek is not far away. It's not locked in a sacred book or a distant monastery. It's already here, resting beneath the noise. But to find it, you must stop trying to strike the bell. You must stop demanding answers from the world and start listening to the stillness within. This kind of wisdom doesn't arrive with flashing lights. It's subtle. It moves like a shift in the wind, like a body relaxing after years of tension. You don't even realize it's come until you feel different, calmer, clearer, more aligned. And it didn't come from doing more. It came from finally doing less. In meditation, this is why we let the breath lead. Not because the breath gives us answers, but because it returns us to presence. It teaches us to stay. And in that staying, the mind begins to quiet. The body begins to loosen. And what rises from that stillness is not silence, but signal. A soundless guidance that doesn't use language, but speaks directly to the center of your being. It is tempting to seek wisdom through action, to chase after the next insight, the next method, the next spiritual breakthrough. But sometimes the most radical step is stopping. Not quitting life, but pausing the constant reaching. The bell rings when nothing else is moving. It reveals itself not through force, but through surrender. You've already seen how control interferes with people, with outcomes, with inner peace. But it also blocks insight. It keeps your awareness at the surface, constantly solving, reacting, adjusting, and surface living creates surface answers, shallow clarity that doesn't last. But when you drop into stillness, not to escape, but to dwell, you begin to notice something deeper. The wisdom that has always been speaking beneath the static. This isn't about abandoning the mind. It's about putting it in its proper place, letting it serve the present rather than dominate it. When the mind becomes quiet, awareness deepens. You begin to feel truth, not just think it. You begin to know what to do, not because a voice told you, but because the path feels unmistakably clear, like a bell that finally echoes across a silent room. True insight doesn't argue. It doesn't rush. It simply is. It arises when your need to force disappears, when your grip on the situation loosens, when your identity no longer hinges on knowing. In that moment, the truth doesn't need to be proven. It just rings, and the sound is unmistakable. This is why so many of the deepest spiritual moments happen in silence, in solitude, in stillness. Not because those moments contain more information, but because they clear the space for inner truth to rise. A bell can't be heard in a storm, but remove the storm, and the quietest ring becomes a revelation. Sometimes the wisdom you need is not a solution. It's a realization that no solution is needed. That what you thought was a problem is simply a passing cloud. That what you thought had to be fixed is already resolving itself. This kind of knowing is not passive. It's active in its stillness. It moves the way water shapes rock, softly, steadily, without noise. The practice is to stop intervening where presence is enough. Stop managing what peace alone can tend to. This means pausing before reacting, breathing before speaking, waiting before jumping to conclusions. And in that pause, you'll start to hear it. The bell that rings without striking. And when you hear it, you'll know. Not because it tells you everything you want to hear, but because it resonates with something so deep inside you that doubt can't touch it. The clarity doesn't need to be explained. It simply feels right. This kind of inner clarity also transforms how you show up in the world. You no longer rush decisions. You stop arguing just to be right. You don't force your perspective on others. You trust that your presence grounded in truth is enough to influence the space around you. You become less reactive and more reflective, not because you're unsure, but because you're connected to a deeper confidence that doesn't need to shout. This is where real transformation begins, not in the moments where everything goes according to plan, but in the ones where you stop planning and start listening. In those moments, something ancient within you wakes up. Not a new version of yourself, but the version that's been waiting beneath all the roles and expectations. You begin to trust your silence more than other people's noise. You begin to rest, not because the work is done, but because you know that rest itself is part of the work. You stop needing to fix things that aren't broken. You start recognizing that the greatest wisdom is not something you collect, it's something you uncover. And when others come to you for answers, you don't rush to give advice. You hold space. You listen, because you know that sometimes the best guidance isn't given, it's discovered in stillness. The bell doesn't need to be struck, it needs silence to be heard. Let this be your invitation now to stop solving for a moment, to stop reaching, to simply sit with yourself as you are without agenda, to feel the breath not as a tool, but as a presence. Let everything else settle. Let your thoughts rest. Let your emotions pass. And in the quiet that remains, notice what arises. It may be soft, it may be subtle, but it is real, and it is yours. Let this be the moment. You stop demanding wisdom and start allowing it. Let this be the silence where something true begins to ring. And when you finally stop striking the bell, when you begin to hear the wisdom that rises in silence without force, something even more delicate begins to appear. That wisdom doesn't just point you toward peace or clarity. It also points you toward endings, quiet ones, sudden ones, inevitable ones. And this is where the mind may resist again, because even when silence shows the truth, it's not always a truth the heart feels ready to face. Sometimes it's the truth that something is over. A season has passed. A connection has run its course. And the only way forward now is to let go. There's a moment just before the leaf falls that holds everything. The beauty of what was, the sorrow of its passing, the instinct to hold on, and the silent understanding that no amount of gripping can keep it from the ground. That moment lives inside every human heart. It comes when the job ends, when the friendship fades, when the dream no longer fits, and the truth is clear. Not because it's loud, but because it no longer waits for your permission to be real. Buddhist practice asks us to meet that moment. Not with resistance, but with reverence. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. Endings are not mistakes. They are movements, natural shifts in the rhythm of life. And while the mind may label them as loss, the Dharma sees them differently, as transitions, as openings, as the shedding required for deeper roots to grow. The pain comes not from the ending itself, but from the belief that it shouldn't be ending, that you could somehow freeze time, keep the tree in full bloom forever. But nature does not work that way. It transforms, it evolves, it makes space for what's next by letting go of what no longer serves. And to live aligned with that rhythm is to live in harmony with truth. When you hold on to what is already falling, suffering increases. You tighten, you resist, you prolong something that's already slipping away. But when you soften even just a little, you begin to feel something different. Not the finality of death, but the beginning of release. And in that release, there is peace. The leaf does not resent the wind. It does not protest the fall. It lets go when the moment comes, not because it wants to leave, but because it trusts the cycle. It knows that its time is not ending. It's transforming. It is no longer what it was, but it is not lost. It returns to the earth. It nourishes what comes next. This is how Buddhist practice teaches us to meet change, not as something to be fixed, but something to be welcomed with awareness. The end of a relationship, the closing of a chapter, the moment when the identity you once carried no longer fits. These are not failures. These are signs of life moving. To embrace natural endings, you must first see them clearly, not rush past them, not numb them, not disguise them as detours, but honor them for what they are. Necessary turning points, invitations to shed what no longer aligns, and that requires presence. Presence that does not demand closure, but allows for integration. Grief may still rise. It often does. That is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of love, of connection, of how much something mattered. But grief is not an enemy. It is a companion that walks beside you until you are ready to walk alone again. And walking alone is not a punishment. It is a practice, a chance to return to yourself, to listen more closely, to notice who you are when the old roles fall away. when the attachments loosen, when the story begins to change. Endings also bring space, and in that space, a new kind of breath appears. A deeper inhale, a softer exhale. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer fighting what can't be stopped. You are no longer pouring energy into resistance. You are letting life move. The leaf does not return to the branch, and you don't have to return to versions of yourself that you've outgrown. Growth doesn't always look like building something new. Sometimes it looks like dissolving what is finished, honoring it, and allowing the empty space to remain empty for a while. There is wisdom in the pause between what was and what's next. That pause can feel like death, but it is often the beginning of new roots taking hold beneath the surface. You don't always have to know what comes next. You just have to trust that letting go is not the end of your story. It's part of how your next chapter is born. The mind might say, "But I gave so much, but it wasn't supposed to end like this." And those thoughts are valid. They're echoes of attachment, not proof that something has gone wrong. You are allowed to mourn what ended. You are allowed to cry over the leaf that fell, but you do not need to carry it forever. Some things were beautiful. Some things taught you. Some things stayed longer than they should have, and all of them shaped you. The letting go is not a rejection of the past. It's a commitment to the present, a quiet agreement to meet life as it is, not as you wanted it to stay. When you stop resisting endings, you begin to recognize their beauty, the relief of not having to pretend anymore, the honesty of saying, "This has run its course," the strength it takes to stop clinging and start trusting. This doesn't mean you disconnect from love. It means your love becomes freer, less possessive, more alive. It means you don't demand permanence in a world made of change. You don't need forever to feel something deeply. You don't need guarantees to give your heart fully. Every leaf that falls is a teacher. It shows you how to release with grace, how to let go without losing yourself, how to face the wind with open arms instead of clenched fists. And every time you do, you become lighter. Not because you're less, but because you're more in tune with what matters now. Tonight, if something is ending, if you're standing at the edge of something you don't want to let go of, breathe with it, name it, feel the weight of it, and then, with kindness, begin to release it. You don't have to force the fall. Just loosen your hold. Let the natural process unfold. Say to yourself, "I trust what's ending. I trust what will grow in its place. I don't need to hold what no longer holds me." And with that, feel the ground return beneath your feet. Not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer trying to stand still in a season that's already moved on. The leaf has let go, and now so can you. And when the leaf finally falls, when you no longer grip what has already gone, something unexpected happens. Not just emptiness, but openness. Space not filled with fear or regret, but with possibility. And this space leads to one of the most transformative truths of all. You don't have to keep taking to feel full. You don't need to possess to feel secure. Sometimes the greatest power is not in what you hold, but in what you freely give. Not to control, not to gain, but to release. This is where generosity or dhyana becomes not just an act of kindness, but a deep spiritual practice. The hand that opens without taking is not weak, it is awake. In Buddhist tradition, Generosity is considered the first perfection. It's not secondary, it's foundational, because to give without attachment is to confront one of the core illusions of suffering, that we must cling to have enough, that what we own defines our worth, that holding on protects us, but true giving undoes this illusion at the root. It teaches the mind that value doesn't come from what is stored, but from what flows. Dana is not charity. It's not a performance. It's a quiet offering that comes from a place beyond ego. It is a giving that expects nothing. It is the absence of grasping disguised as kindness. It is the surrender of control under the cover of compassion. This is important because many people give but still cling. They give their time, their love, their effort, but hold on to expectations. They want appreciation. They want recognition. They want control over how the gift is received. But this isn't true, Dana. That's a transaction, and transactions carry weight. True generosity carries none. When the hand opens without needing to take, it no longer fears loss. It doesn't calculate worth. It simply allows flow, and this flow heals both the giver and the receiver. The giver is freed from self-obsession. The receiver is given space to feel seen without debt. No one is bound. Nothing is owned. Buddhist practice teaches that giving breaks the illusion of permanence, the act of letting something go. A material possession, time, attention, reminds us that we do not own anything. Not truly. Even the body we live in is borrowed. Every moment of life is a gift we can't keep. Dana mirrors this truth. When you give, you align with reality instead of fighting it, and it extends beyond things. Giving attention without needing to be the center. Giving love without controlling how it returns. Giving forgiveness without holding it over someone's head. These are harder forms of generosity because they ask us to let go of emotional control, the subtle kind that hides inside noble acts. But here's the paradox. The more freely you give, the more you receive, but not in the way the mind expects. You receive peace, lightness, connection that's not based on power, trust that isn't bought, joy that isn't earned. And you begin to feel that what you feared you would lose through giving is the very thing giving returns to you tenfold. Dana also softens the walls between self and other. It blurs the hard line of separation. When you give genuinely, the illusion of isolation weakens. You see that the line between mine and yours is not as solid as it seemed. You begin to understand that your joy is linked to theirs, that your peace is not private property, but something that grows through shared humanity. This is not a philosophy to admire from afar. It's a practice, a way of moving through the world, a habit of offering, not as a performance, but as a reflection of presence. You give not because you're supposed to, but because you see the moment clearly, and the most natural response is openness, and that openness trains the heart. Each act of generosity becomes a quiet lesson in detachment, not cold attachment, but warm freedom. You offer and you let go. You act and you don't grip the outcome, and this trains you to live more lightly, to move through the world with less friction, less need. This practice also works in reverse. When you withhold, when you cling, you feel it in your body. The tightness, the fear, the pressure. Holding too much of anything creates suffering. Even the grasping at good feelings becomes exhausting. But when the hand opens, the body breathes, the heart expands, the mind rests. Generosity, when practiced deeply, undoes the identity of lack, that hidden story that says, "I don't have enough." I'm not enough. If I give, I'll be empty. Giving shows you that you are already full, that you don't need to protect your peace with walls. You can offer it, share it, live from it. This also applies not only to individuals, but to the way we relate to the world. A society built on taking, on endless accumulation, on hoarding status and safety creates collective anxiety. But generosity softens the system. It introduces trust into a cycle that runs on fear. It reminds people that not everything is a transaction, that value can exist outside of profit, that relationships can be built on care, not leverage. In the teachings, even the Buddha himself relied on dana. He didn't sell his teachings, he offered them, and the communities that supported him did so not out of obligation, but out of reverence. It was a mutual generosity, an energy of flow, not extraction. So how do you live this? It begins with awareness. Notice when you hold too tightly, when your giving comes with strings, when your kindness masks control, and then begin to open small steps. Give without explanation, without waiting for praise, without needing a specific outcome, not to feel better, just to be free. And when the fear rises, and it will, breathe through it. Let your body remember that you are not losing, you are releasing. You are stepping back into rhythm with reality, into the truth that everything you try to keep will one day be taken anyway. So let it move through you. Let it do its work in someone else's life. And do this not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, when the heart wants to close, when the ego wants to protect, when your pain says, "Don't give again." That's when the practice becomes real. That's when dana stops being an idea and becomes a transformation. Because what you're really giving up isn't the thing. It's the illusion that you need it to be whole. So tonight, feel your hands literally. Let them rest open on your lap. Let the body show you the gesture, and then ask yourself, where can I open more? What have I been gripping? Not just in objects, but in thoughts, in relationships, in identity. Let the answers come. Let them be gentle. You don't have to fix it all now. Just begin. Begin with the smallest offering. A thought released, a kindness given, a need let go. And as you rest, repeat silently. I can offer without owning. I can love without holding. I can live with open hands. And when the hand opens without needing to take, when the act of giving becomes a soft release instead of a silent demand, something begins to shift. You start to feel less tangled, less rushed, less burdened by the invisible weight of having to shape everything perfectly. But there's still one place where control quietly hides, the breath. Not the act of breathing itself, but the tension that builds when you forget to return to it. When life spins too fast, when the urge to fix everything takes over, and yet with one inhale everything can settle. The dust doesn't need to be swept. It needs to be left alone long enough to land. And that's what mindful breathing offers, a return to peace, not through effort, but through presence. In the Buddhist path, the breath is not just a biological necessity. It's a bridge, a thread between the body and the mind, between reaction and awareness, between the chaos of the world and the clarity within. And unlike anything else you might rely on, it is always available. Always faithful, always here. Mindful breathing is not dramatic. It won't make the problems disappear. It won't erase your schedule or give you immediate answers. But what it does is even more powerful. It stops the spiral. It breaks the pattern. It invites the nervous system to pause before it tries to fix, solve, defend, or chase. It shifts the attention from the storm to the eye of it. The breath grounds. It does not need to be manipulated to do this. Simply noticed, received, felt. When the mind is racing, the breath slows the race. When the body is bracing, the breath softens the grip. It reminds you that not everything has to be controlled, because not everything is broken. The world teaches urgency, alerts, demands, notifications, problems you're told must be handled now. But the breath teaches a different tempo. It slows the drum beat. It turns down the volume. It says, you can be here just as you are. You don't need to solve this moment. You only need to return to it. And that return is where peace begins. Not the peace that comes from everything going your way, but the peace that's been waiting under the noise, like dust finally settling, once the wind stops thrashing. This doesn't mean life stops happening, but how you meet it changes. Instead of reacting to everything with urgency, you begin to respond from stillness. Instead of trying to change the external world to find peace, you start tending to the space within you where peace already lives. Breathing with awareness doesn't require effort. It requires willingness. A willingness to stop for a few seconds and turn inward, to notice the inhale as it rises, to follow the exhale as it leaves, to be with that movement without needing to fix or change it. In that pause, the internal storm begins to fade. Many traditions talk about finding peace, but the Buddha pointed directly to the breath as a path to it, not as a symbolic idea, but as a real physical embodied tool. The Anapanasati Sutta, one of the foundational teachings, is entirely centered on mindfulness of breathing. Not because breath is special, but because it is honest, present, unfiltered. The breath doesn't lie. It reflects the truth of how you are. Shallow when afraid, tight when angry, held when anxious. But even then, it doesn't abandon you. It waits for your attention. And the moment you give it your awareness, it begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because presence itself has healing power. When you meet the breath with compassion, it responds. When you meet it with judgment, it resists. But if you let it be what it is, just air moving in and out, it becomes a friend, a quiet companion, reminding you that control isn't necessary, that urgency is optional, that peace begins not with achievement, but with stillness, and that stillness allows everything else to reorganize. Thoughts stop stacking, emotions loosen, reactions pause. The space between stimulus and response expands, and in that space, wisdom begins to move. The kind that doesn't come from thinking harder, but from thinking less. Breath invites you to leave the fight, the inner battle to perfect yourself, to constantly be on guard, to always be solving. It says, what if nothing needs to be fixed right now? And even if the problems are real, even if life is loud, the breath gives you shelter, not from the world, but from the false belief that you are its prisoner. This is not escape. It's reorientation, a chance to step back into yourself before stepping out again. And the more often you return, the more natural it becomes. Breath becomes baseline, home, anchor. When others are loud, when the mind is spinning, when pain rises, the breath is the first and last place to come back to. Because before you can hold anyone else, before you can respond with wisdom, before you can offer peace, you must first breathe into your own. Even the moments of deep struggle can soften when you allow yourself to feel the breath fully. It becomes a rhythm to follow when everything else is uncertain. It becomes a doorway into the now, and in the now, solutions often appear that can't be found in the storm of reaction. And even when no solution comes, even when the confusion remains, breath gives you enough space to hold it, to sit with it without drowning. That alone is healing. That alone is enough. This is why in Buddhist meditation there is no rush to stop thinking. The breath is not used to block thought, but to meet it differently, to sit beside it instead of inside it, to stop believing every urgent message it sends, and eventually thought quiets. Not by force, but by being seen. The dust settles because you're no longer kicking it up. The mind softens because it's no longer being chased. The heart opens because it's no longer bracing for the next blow. And breath continues gently, patiently, rhythmically, showing you that life is still here, even in the uncertainty, that there is something underneath the worry, that the moment you return to what's real, the need to fix everything starts to dissolve. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently from a grounded place, from a clear place, from a place that doesn't lose itself while trying to help. So tonight, let yourself stop fixing, stop solving even for just a few breaths. Let the world do what it will for now. Let the questions remain open. Let the dust fall. Breathe in not to achieve calm, but to remember it. Breathe out not to control the moment, but to surrender to it. And as your body begins to relax, feel the return, not to who you were before the stress, but to who you are beneath it. You are the space it moves through. You are not the noise. You are the one who listens. And the breath is your reminder every time. Let it guide you. Let it clear the air. And once the breath is returned to, once the body softens and the dust begins to settle, there is something else that becomes visible. Not through effort, not through force, but through the stillness that remains. It becomes clear that peace doesn't arrive by solving every problem, or by silencing every fear. It comes from not needing to resist the dark, from no longer trying to push it away. It comes from realizing that presence itself is a light. A single candle does not shout at the darkness. It doesn't fight. It simply burns. And that is enough. There is a deep misunderstanding in the mind that says, if suffering exists, it must be eliminated. That pain must be pushed away. That darkness must be defeated through struggle. But the Buddhist path points to a quieter, more radical truth. The darkness doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be lit. And that light does not come from rage or control or perfection. It comes from attention, from being fully here, from not turning away. Suffering in its many forms tends to grow in shadows. It feeds off avoidance, off the tension of inner war. But the moment awareness enters, it begins to lose shape. It's not that the pain vanishes, but the grip it holds begins to loosen. The wound, no longer hidden, begins to breathe. You've already seen that control can't make everything better. You've seen that letting go brings clarity, that silence holds wisdom, and that breath brings peace. Now the next step is even softer. The realization that presence is powerful on its own. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to fight every emotion. You only need to remain present with it, just like a candle doesn't argue with the dark. It just shines. This way of being doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean that you sit back and watch the world burn. It means that your action comes from light, not fear. That your choices arise from clarity, not panic. You're not driven by the need to push darkness out. You're guided by the light that naturally arises when you stay centered. Presence has a quality that is hard to describe, but easy to feel. It doesn't solve the world's problems in one breath, but it changes the energy of the space. It shifts the way you relate to what's difficult. When you stop resisting, you stop feeding the thing you're afraid of. When you stop pushing, you stop reinforcing the tension. The candle teaches that you can hold pain without becoming it, that you can sit with fear without needing it to disappear, that your stillness can be more healing than your strategies, and that your attention, steady, non-judging, gentle, is the most powerful force you have. So many people think peace is something to be earned, that if they do enough, change enough, win enough battles within themselves, they'll finally deserve peace. But peace isn't a prize. It's a state that's already available, not when everything is quiet, but when you stop running from the noise. You don't light a candle to make the dark go away. You light it because that's what candles do. And the dark, seeing it, begins to shift. This is how the Dharma works. It doesn't promise that the darkness will leave. It doesn't offer escape. It offers a path into presence. And in that presence, everything becomes less frightening. Not because it's changed, but because you have. When you stop resisting, you open. When you open, you allow. And when you allow, healing begins. Not as a project, but as a process. That process cannot be rushed, but it doesn't need to be. Because even a little light changes the whole room. You may still feel sadness, still experience fear, still face uncertainty, but you won't panic in it. You won't collapse into it, because now there's a candle burning at the center of it all. And you know how to keep it lit, not by fanning it with anxiety, but by protecting it with presence. This isn't just a mental state. It's a lived practice. In every breath, in every moment where you could react, but instead choose to stay. When you feel the urge to run, and instead choose to remain rooted. When you soften instead of tighten. When you allow instead of defend, that is the candle. That is the light. And it doesn't need to be big, just consistent, just steady, just honest. Even in relationships, this energy transforms everything. When someone brings chaos or pain into your space, the old reaction might have been to fight or fix, but now the response shifts. You hold the light. You stay present. You don't get pulled into their storm. You offer clarity, not as dominance, but as steadiness. The darkness is not the problem. The resistance to it is because the more you fight it, the more you entangle with it. But the moment you let go of that fight, you begin to see through it. You see that it's not solid. That much of the fear was built from habit, not truth. And so you keep your light steady, not to control the moment, but to meet it, to allow what is without collapsing into it, to stand with an open heart, not a clenched fist. You might feel small at first, fragile, like a flickering flame in a vast night, but over time, you'll begin to notice something surprising. The more consistent your presence, the more the world around you begins to soften too. Not because you changed it, but because you stopped resisting it. The light you carry doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists. And in that existence, everything begins to feel possible again. So tonight, you don't need to chase anything. You don't need to fix anything. Let the thoughts come. Let the emotions rise. Let the body feel what it feels. And through all of it, stay. Don't flee. Don't argue. Just breathe. Just witness. Just be. That's the candle. And from this place, your life begins to transform. Not because the darkness has ended, but because your light no longer depends on its absence. And when the light doesn't need to chase the dark, when the candle simply burns and the resistance melts, what remains is not silence, but clarity. A clarity that begins to reveal just how much of what we called struggle was never truly real. Not because the pain wasn't there, but because the mind was telling a story about the pain. The suffering wasn't always in the experience. It was in the interpretation, the belief, the attachment to how things appeared. And this is where perception becomes the final gate, because the eye that blinked and missed the burden didn't make the weight disappear. It simply stopped mistaking it for something it had to carry. There's an old saying in Buddhist practice, with our thoughts we make the world. It doesn't mean the world is imaginary. It means our experience of it is shaped by how we see it, not by the raw data, but by the frame, by the lens we wear without realizing. And much of what we call control is not in our hands, it's in our perception. The belief that if we think hard enough, worry long enough, analyze deep enough, we'll gain power over what scares us. But that search for power creates more tension. The real shift comes when you start to see that the burden was never what happened. It was the story built around it. When awareness sharpens, you begin to notice that most control isn't action. It's attention. It's the way the mind keeps circling, trying to make sense of everything before it lets go. It believes struggle is proof of strength, that if it can just grip a little tighter, the fear will leave. But sometimes, all that's needed is a blink, a soft release, and in that tiny pause, the illusion crumbles. Not because you figured it out, but because you stopped staring at it through the lens of resistance. The mind often creates tension by assuming its version of reality is the truth. But perception is not truth. It's a translation, and translations can distort. They can miss the nuance. They can turn a breeze into a threat. But when awareness opens wider, you start to see that the struggle was never in the wind. It was in how you braced for it. This is where mindfulness does its deepest work. Not in calming the moment, but in recalibrating how you see the moment. When you stop automatically labeling what's happening as good or bad, success or failure, threat or comfort, the moment becomes spacious. And in that space, the pressure drops. A shift in perception can feel like a miracle, but it's not magic. It's the mind remembering how to see without projection. Like noticing that a shadow isn't a monster, just the shape of something misunderstood. Or realizing the weight on your shoulders was never yours to carry. You just believed it was. This awareness allows you to question the stories, not by replacing them with new ones, but by stepping back enough to see that they're not fixed. You thought the meeting went badly, but what if it didn't? You thought the silence meant rejection, but what if it was peace? You thought the delay meant failure, but what if it was realignment? The mind rarely tells neutral stories. It fills in gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions become beliefs, and beliefs become burdens. But once you begin to see that what you feel isn't always caused by the moment itself, but by the meaning you gave it, you begin to unlock the freedom that was hiding in plain sight. Buddhism doesn't ask you to erase perception. It asks you to examine it, to get curious about the lens, to see the gap between what's happening and what you believe it means. That gap is everything. It's where freedom lives, because if perception can change, then your relationship with life can too. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop assuming that every emotion confirms a truth. The emotion is real. The pain may be real, but the meaning doesn't have to be fixed. You can feel hurt and still question the story that says you're not enough. You can feel fear and still recognize that the danger might be imagined. You can feel anger and still pause before deciding someone is against you. A blink is a small thing, but in practice, it's powerful. It's the moment you stop staring so hard at the thing that scares you. It's the breath between reaction and reflection. It's the decision to soften your view long enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, you're seeing the situation through a filter you didn't choose. And that filter is often made of old pain, old defenses, old definitions of worth. It clouds the present with echoes of the past, but perception can be updated, not forcefully, not by erasing what you see, but by noticing how you see and letting the seeing expand. This is why meditation can be transformative, not because it gives you new information, but because it gives you new eyes. Eyes that stop scanning for what's wrong. Eyes that notice the tension in your jaw and don't make it a story. Eyes that see the sadness and hold it without needing it to mean catastrophe. The burden begins to dissolve, not because it becomes lighter, but because it no longer has your identity wrapped around it. You stop being the one who must carry it. You become the one who sees it. And that shift from being to seeing changes everything. It also changes how you show up for others. You stop projecting your fear onto them. You stop reading their silence as rejection. You stop assuming their struggle is yours to solve. You begin to see people more clearly, because your perception is no longer hijacked by your own unexamined fear. This shift doesn't mean you become passive. It means your actions become cleaner, more precise, less entangled. You don't need to control what someone thinks of you if you no longer believe your worth depends on it. You don't need to defend every choice if you trust the clarity behind it. You don't need to be seen a certain way if your self-view is no longer built on fragile narratives. What was once a burden begins to fade, not because life changed, but because you stopped gripping your own version of it so tightly. So tonight, let your awareness widen. Let your gaze soften, not just outwardly, but inwardly too. Notice where you've been staring at a problem without blinking, where the mind has been frozen in its version of what's wrong, and gently blink. Let the muscles of perception relax. Let the stories unravel. Let the meanings return to silence. Say to yourself, I don't need to control what I can see differently. I can meet this moment without believing everything my mind tells me about it. And in that soft shift, the burden begins to dissolve. And once the burden has been seen for what it is, an illusion held in the grip of perception, you begin to understand that most of the pressure you felt was not coming from the world, but from the way you thought you had to move through it. The way you believed strength had to look. Direct, defiant, unbending. But the mind, when it softens, reveals a deeper kind of strength. Not in confrontation, not improving, but in adapting without losing who you are. This is the quiet wisdom of the river, the current that does not argue with the rock. It flows around it, and in doing so, it shapes the world without ever needing to resist it. The Buddhist path teaches that force is rarely the most skillful response, even when faced with opposition, with difficulty, with misunderstanding. The Dharma invites something else: flexibility. This doesn't mean weakness, it means precision. It means knowing when to stand still and when to move, when to speak and when to remain quiet, when to push and when to yield. And this yield is not surrender to defeat, it is surrender to wisdom. The river doesn't lose power by curving around the obstacle. It finds a way. It doesn't stop. It doesn't resist. It doesn't argue. It adapts. And in that adaptation, it remains true to its nature. It continues flowing, steady, clear, uninterrupted by the need to fight for space. That is the strength of yielding. Many people grow up believing that to be strong means to confront, to demand, to stand firm in all situations. But Buddhism points to a subtler power, the power that comes from not needing to win, from not seeing life as a battlefield, from choosing movement over resistance. And in that choice, suffering begins to unravel. The rock in your life could be anything. A person who refuses to understand you, a situation that feels unfair, a pattern that keeps returning. The reactive mind wants to smash against it to force it to move. But the wiser path, the one that creates less pain, is to ask, how can I flow here? How can I respond without needing to confront? Flow doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means expressing them with wisdom. You don't need to shout your truth if your presence already speaks it. You don't need to overpower someone to protect your peace. You protect it by not handing it over in the first place. This is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is immediate, tense, usually rooted in ego. It wants to win, to defend, but response is spacious. It listens, it watches, it waits until it sees the clearest path. And often that path is not through the obstacle but around it. The river doesn't waste energy trying to move what cannot be moved. It moves itself. It trusts its direction more than it fears the block. That is not weakness, that is mastery. The understanding that adaptation is not compromise, it's wisdom in motion. This also applies internally. The rocks inside you, those hard places, those habits of mind, those emotional triggers, you don't need to confront all of them at once. You don't need to break yourself apart to become whole. Sometimes the path forward is not digging deeper, but allowing yourself to move around what isn't ready to shift, to acknowledge the resistance without engaging it, to keep flowing in the direction of your peace. Adaptation in this way becomes a sacred act. It means you are listening to life instead of fighting it. You are no longer forcing outcomes but moving with what arises. That doesn't mean giving up. It means being wise with your effort, using your energy where it matters, not trying to change what isn't yours to control. This is where so much of our suffering softens. When we stop trying to make people agree with us. When we stop trying to get closure from those who won't give it. When we stop forcing healing before it's time, we become like water. Not because we have no direction, but because we've stopped wasting energy on things that do not move. And over time, that flow shapes everything. The hardest stone becomes smooth, not through force, but through time, through the consistency of contact, the quiet power of presence. That's what adaptation gives you. The ability to stay on your path without burning out. The ability to remain soft without becoming weak. This is the heart of skillful means. Not fixed rules, but flexible application. Responding to the moment as it is. Not with what worked yesterday. Not with what you wish were true, but with what is needed now. That requires presence, attention, humility, and the courage to move differently. You begin to notice how often confrontation is unnecessary. How many arguments could dissolve if just one person chose to listen without defensiveness? How much energy is spent proving what no one is asking you to prove? And how liberating it is to let all that go. This also transforms how you hold your own pain. You stop trying to fix every emotion the moment it arrives. You stop trying to be perfectly calm all the time. You start flowing with the inner weather instead of battling it. Sadness arises. You feel it. You breathe. You let it move through. You don't set up camp in it, but you don't push it out either. You adapt. And the more you do this, the more confidence grows. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that knows I can handle this. I don't have to control everything to feel safe. I don't need everything to change for me to keep growing. I can move with life and let it shape me without breaking me. This is the power of non-confrontation. It gives you back your energy. It gives you back your peace. It teaches you to move without friction, to shift without losing center, to bend without losing spine. And this is not just personal, it's collective. Societies built on dominance and resistance burn out, but communities that learn how to adapt, how to listen, how to move with each other instead of against each other, those are the ones that endure. So tonight, think about what you've been pushing against, what you've been trying to change through pressure, through tension, through argument. Ask yourself, is there another way? Can I flow around this instead of smashing into it again? Can I protect my energy by moving with the truth instead of against it? Say to yourself, I don't need to fight to move forward. I don't need to control, to stay strong. I can trust the flow of who I am, and then breathe into that. Let it soften what's still bracing inside you. Let the river keep moving. And after learning to move like the river, after flowing around the rock instead of colliding with it, there's something else that becomes clear. It isn't always the resistance in the world that wears you down. Sometimes it's the invisible need to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged for every thought, every truth, every effort. There's a quiet hunger inside that longs for others to understand, to validate, to echo back what you know within. But in Buddhist practice, one of the most powerful teachings comes in the gentlest form, the whisper that didn't demand to be heard, not because it was unimportant, but because it no longer needed the world's agreement to remain at peace. This kind of silence is not suppression. It's not fear, it's not apathy, it's clarity, the understanding that truth doesn't gain value when others confirm it, that inner knowing doesn't become stronger through external echo. It becomes more stable when you stop needing anything from it, when it can speak softly inside you and remain enough. This lesson is often the hardest for the heart, especially for those who have spent a lifetime trying to prove themselves, who have shaped their voice to match the room, who have learned to speak louder when they feel invisible. But the Dharma shows another way, the way of silence that is not empty but complete, the way of power that doesn't push, doesn't argue, doesn't plead, the power that simply exists. This isn't about isolating yourself. It's about letting go of the craving for external reflection, not because others don't matter, but because their understanding is not your oxygen. You begin to see how much energy is lost in trying to be understood by everyone. How many words are spent not out of sharing but out of insecurity? and how quiet life becomes when you no longer chase after someone else's agreement. There is a deep strength in this, a freedom that comes when you realize you don't have to explain your every feeling, when your emotions don't need to be justified in someone else's language, when your boundaries don't need to be defended with long speeches. They simply are, and that's enough. The whisper is the moment when truth no longer needs an audience. It's not hidden. It's just not broadcast. It's sacred, not secret. It lives where clarity lives in the space between the noise. And when you learn to stay with that whisper without trying to amplify it, you begin to feel something shift. The ego quiets. The soul settles. Silence becomes a teacher here. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of grounded presence. The kind of silence that listens more than it speaks, that notices without reacting, that sees the drama unfold and doesn't rush to join it, that holds space without trying to control it. You begin to see how much of your communication was rooted in fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being dismissed, fear of not being heard. And as that fear softens, your words become fewer but heavier, not because they carry weight, but because they no longer need to prove anything. This also shifts how you move through conflict. You stop needing the last word. You stop explaining to people who aren't listening. You stop pouring your truth into places that only echo back confusion. Instead, you allow silence to do its work. You let time teach what urgency cannot. There is a dignity in not defending yourself, in not forcing people to see your side, in allowing misunderstandings to float without needing to chase after them. That doesn't mean you allow disrespect, but it means you no longer tie your peace to someone else's perception of you. And this changes how you relate to your own inner world. You begin to sit with your thoughts without narrating them. You let feelings come and go without needing to tell a story around each one. You rest in the knowing that not every truth needs to be shared to be real. In meditation, this is why the silence matters so much. Not just the outer silence, but the inner one. The moment when you stop trying to organize your mind and simply let it be, not controlling the thoughts, not suppressing them, just observing without needing to respond. And in that stillness, something else begins to emerge. Not a solution, but a deeper presence. This is what the whisper teaches. That presence is enough. That truth can live inside you without having to announce itself. That the deepest clarity often arrives when you stop talking long enough to feel it fully. And this doesn't make you invisible. It makes you rooted. People feel this difference. They feel when your peace doesn't depend on their approval. They feel when your silence holds substance, not avoidance. And often they lean in, not to fill the silence, but to understand it. You also begin to notice how much space opens up when you stop needing to narrate your life. How many moments become more vivid when you're not busy explaining them. How relationships deepen when you're not always trying to manage how you're perceived. This is not the silence of giving up. It's the silence of letting go, of realizing that not every truth needs to be argued into acceptance. Some truths become stronger when left alone, like fire that doesn't rage, but smolders, steady, quiet, unstoppable. And in this quiet, you find yourself again. Not the self you present to be accepted, but the self that exists beneath all performance. The one that doesn't need to be heard to feel whole. The one that no longer shouts because it finally feels safe to speak softly or not at all. So tonight, if there's something inside you that no one understands, let it be. Don't rush to explain. Don't demand to be seen. Just stay with it. Hold it like a whisper. Let it live inside you without needing to echo outside you. Say to yourself, I do not need to be understood to be at peace. My truth does not require volume. My clarity is not fragile. And then rest in that. Let the silence deepen. And when the whisper no longer needs to be heard, when truth rests inside you without seeking echo or explanation, something deeper begins to unravel. Not from outside pressure, not from the world changing, but from the inside loosening. You start to feel a tension that's been there for years begin to weaken. The grip that held you in place wasn't always visible, but it was always there. And now with silence as your teacher and presence as your strength, you begin to see it clearly for what it is. Control. The rope that once seemed like safety, purpose, even identity, now revealing itself as the very thing that's kept you bound. Control is a quiet captor. It disguises itself as responsibility, as planning, as order. It offers the illusion of power, promising stability in an uncertain world. But beneath that promise is a tightening, a weight, a constant pressure to hold everything together. And over time, that pressure doesn't create freedom. It creates fatigue. It creates fear. It turns life into something that must be managed, fixed, and controlled, rather than experienced and trusted. In Buddhist teachings, this is the root of clinging, not just to possessions or people, but to the belief that if we let go, we'll fall apart, that if we don't pull the rope tighter, everything will unravel. But the irony is the rope was never keeping us safe. It was keeping us stuck. Every time we try to control how others see us, we tighten that rope. Every time we force a decision that isn't ready, speak a truth that isn't ripe, or cling to a plan that no longer fits, we're adding threads to the tension, not realizing that control, though it feels secure, is a kind of prison, not made of walls, but of habits, of old beliefs, of the fear that surrender means failure. But just like a rope wears over time, so too does our ability to keep pretending that control is working. We start to notice the fraying in our stress, in our impatience, in the sharp edges of our thoughts, in the way even joy starts to feel like something we're managing instead of feeling. That fraying isn't the beginning of chaos. It's the beginning of freedom. This practice also brings forgiveness, because when you learn to hold your own emotional storms without judgment, you begin to hold others with the same compassion. You see that everyone is carrying their own fire. Some are burning quietly, others are consumed, and your job is not to extinguish their flame. It's to be steady in your own, to be a safe presence, a warm light, a reminder that intensity doesn't have to mean destruction. Even when emotions are overwhelming, the teaching remains the same. Stay. Don't fix right away. Don't label. Don't escape. Just stay. Let the energy move. Let it speak. And when it softens, and it always softens, you'll find something new beneath it. A message, a truth, a clarity. And then you act, not from the heat, but from the wisdom that rose through it. This is how emotional energy becomes sacred, not by avoiding it, not by drowning in it, but by learning how to carry it with presence. Fire becomes warmth, anger becomes clarity, grief becomes compassion, joy becomes gratitude, and you become the one who holds it all, not with fear, but with reverence. So tonight, feel what's rising in you, not to control it, not to suppress it, but to see it clearly. Let the fire burn, not to destroy, but to illuminate. Let it show you what needs attention, what needs love, what needs space. Say to yourself, I do not need to put out the fire. I only need to stay close enough to understand it. My emotions are not the enemy. They are energy waiting to be guided. And then breathe. Let the flame soften. Let the warmth return. And once the fire has warmed without burning, once emotional energy is no longer something to suppress, but something to understand, you begin to see the walls you built around yourself for what they truly are. Not strength, not safety, but tension. The invisible pressure of always trying to shield your inner world from unpredictability. All those guarded decisions, all those careful calculations, the mental effort it takes to close every door to uncertainty. It feels like protection, but it's exhaustion. And now, a new question rises from that heat. What if you stopped trying to close the gate? What if you let it stand open, not as an invitation to harm, but as a sign of trust? The illusion that control creates safety is one of the most persistent patterns in the mind. It teaches you to lock things down, to manage every outcome, to plan for every threat. But this approach treats life as a threat in itself. It assumes the world is hostile and you are alone. And over time, the gate you close to protect yourself starts keeping peace out as well, not just pain. Buddhist practice asks something radical. It asks you to stop defending and start noticing, to stop reacting to fear and begin understanding its source. Because fear doesn't come from what might happen. It comes from believing you can't meet it if it does. And so the gate stays closed tightly, rigidly, silently. But real strength is not in how many locks you fasten. It's in the willingness to open. Not recklessly, not naively, but with awareness, with full presence. The kind of openness that says, I will not try to manage every variable. I will not organize my life into a fortress. I will meet what comes, and I will trust what stays. This shift feels strange at first, because we've been taught that control equals power, that caution equals wisdom, that planning every outcome is the smart thing to do. But what if that control is what's keeping life from reaching you? What if caution has turned into hesitation and planning into paralysis? The gate that stands open is not weak. It is deeply rooted in clarity. It is the result of seeing that your inner peace is not at risk just because the world is unpredictable, that your heart does not need to be behind walls to remain safe. That openness can be the foundation of the strongest kind of presence. Openness allows life to move freely. It makes space for connection. It allows unexpected beauty. It lets in the moments that control would have missed. And it teaches you that trust is not something you wait to feel. It's something you choose to practice. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped needing to brace for the worst. To open the gate doesn't mean you never say no. It means your no comes from awareness, not from fear. It means you can walk away when something doesn't feel right. But you don't do it because you're afraid of discomfort. You do it because you're aligned with what matters. Your boundaries become cleaner. Not walls, but lines of clarity. This kind of strength becomes evident in small moments. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop rehearsing every conversation, when you stop editing your truth to keep others comfortable. These acts of openness require courage because they risk being misunderstood, but they also create space for something real to emerge. And with that space comes relief. The mental load of control begins to lift. The constant monitoring, adjusting, preparing, it fades. you start to see how much effort went into keeping the gate closed and how little peace it actually brought. You start to realize that most of your safety came not from control, but from presence, from knowing you can meet life without hiding from it. The open gate also transforms relationships. When you stop trying to control how others see you, how they react, how they behave, you begin to meet them as they are, not as projections of your fear. You become less reactive, less defensive, and ironically more secure, because you're no longer trying to manage everything. They are. You are just being. This openness is not the absence of care. It is care without panic. It's the decision to stay soft in a world that tells you to harden. It's the strength to be transparent, even when you could hide. It's the willingness to let things be what they are, rather than what you think they should be. Buddhism teaches this through the heart, practices metta, karuna, mudita, upka, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. All of these require openness. You cannot love fully with a closed heart. You cannot feel joy for others while calculating your own safety. You cannot be at peace while controlling every outcome. The gate that stands open is the one that trusts itself. It doesn't fear the world because it no longer believes the world defines its worth. It doesn't hide because it no longer believes vulnerability is a threat. It knows pain may still come, but it also knows that trying to avoid it often brings more suffering than pain itself. So what happens when you open? You begin to feel not just emotion, but aliveness. You begin to reconnect with the parts of you that have been quiet for too long. Creativity, spontaneity, play, the ability to move through life without second-guessing every step. You begin to feel the difference between living and managing. And when fear arises again, as it will, you don't shame yourself for it. You welcome it. You listen. You let it speak. But you no longer let it lock the gate. You thank it for its concern. And you move forward anyway. That is the heart of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to open anyway. So tonight, ask yourself, what do you still hold back? What gate is still shut? Not because it should be, but because you forgot that it could swing. Don't push it, just sense it. Let it be heard. Tell yourself, I am not safer behind the gate. I am stronger when I open. I trust what comes. I release what leaves. I remain whole, and with that, let the gate stand open. And once the gate stands open, once the walls are lowered, not out of craziness, but from trust, what becomes visible is what flows through. Not everything that enters will stay. Not all that remains will come back. Some moments exist only to pass. Some individuals come only to instruct. Some things happen only to move on. But the mind, still conditioned in the past, still longs to grasp. It longs to clutch every joy, every connection, every possibility of life and say, stay. And this is where the next lesson starts. Not in struggling for stability, but in embracing instability. Not in holding on, but in trusting the letting go, like sand that slides willingly from the fingers. Not lost, not wasted, but given back. This sort of letting go is not passive, it's deliberate. It's the understanding that which enters your life is not for possession, it's for experiencing. And when its time is up, releasing it is not a failure. It's a gesture of comprehension. The Buddha instructed that clinging was the cause of suffering. Not that loss is painful in itself, but that resistance to loss amplifies the pain. We mourn not just when things cease, but when we insist that they continue forever. We mourn not only the change, but our powerlessness to prevent it. But nothing ever remains, not in the manner we desire. The breath departs. The seasons change. The ones we love grow, change, depart, or die. Our own self changes over the years, dropping and reforming. And the more closely we cling to what is attempting to move through us, the tighter we become. Attempting to grasp sand only makes it escape all the more quickly. This is not to say we cease loving. This is to say we cease to become confused about love and possession. Love permits things to leave. It doesn't grasp by force. It doesn't moor by fear. It releases the hand and says, "Thanks for staying." Even while the leaving is starting to shape. This type of letting go does not occur all at once. It unfolds. At first, you feel the grip. Then you relax it. Then you breathe into the hollowness. And gradually you realize that the space had been left behind isn't loss. It's clarity. The sand didn't disappear. It went back into the earth. What was never yours to keep had finally been released. And so had you. Believing in what leaves means viewing movement as a part of the design. It means respecting the impermanence rather than pushing against it. Every sunset is a letting go. Every exhale is a release. Each goodbye a reminder that we are not here to take and retain, but touch and let go. And this is not unique to relationships or possessions, but to emotions, thoughts, seasons of life. You might be carrying an iteration of yourself that no longer fits, a goal that once motivated you, but now feels empty, a belief that once shielded you, but now constricts. These also need to be permitted to slip away. Releasing without grieving doesn't indicate that you don't feel anything. It indicates that you permit the sorrow to move through and not become permanent. You let the tears flow, but you do not make them chains. You sit with the pain, but you do not wear it as a name. You permit the moment to finish itself without hanging on to the feeling it left behind. This is where peace resides, not in the lack of change, but in the midst of trust. Trust that life is doing its thing. That what departs creates room for what is to come. That each departure is also an arrival into something unknown. This does not make the journey simple. Some goodbyes are gentle, others shatter you. But even the brokenness has a lesson that your heart can break and still be intact. That the loss doesn't mean the end of love. It's all part of how love teaches depth. With time, you realize that the less you cling to, the freer you feel, the lighter you get, not empty, clear, not disconnected, deeply present. And in that letting go, you begin to see beauty you had missed in holding, the touch of the wind on your skin, the sound of silence enveloping you when the noise is removed. The way releasing creates space for air. When a rope begins to unravel, it doesn't collapse all at once. It loosens slowly, and so too must we. Control can't be cut abruptly without shocking the system. It must be unwoven, thread by thread. Awareness is the tool that does this. Each moment of noticing, I don't need to force this. I can let this go. I don't have to hold this together, is a thread released. The mind will resist at first because control gave it identity. It was the one who kept things moving, who stayed responsible, who knew the next step. But the Dharma teaches a different kind of knowing, a knowing that does not control but trusts, that listens instead of plans, that watches instead of grasps. Control is reactive. Freedom is responsive. Control is rigid. Freedom is fluid. And as the rope unravels, what remains is not nothing. It's space. It's room to breathe. It's the part of you that was always waiting to move without chains. This applies even to the self. We don't just try to control the world. We try to control who we are. We hold ourselves to identities that no longer fit. We keep repeating stories that keep us small. We cling to the rope of "I'm this kind of person," not because it's true, but because it's familiar. But identity, like anything else, is meant to evolve. It is not fixed. It is not a contract. It is a river, and control is the dam that blocks it. When you begin to unravel the threads of identity, letting go of needing to be right, to be good, to be strong, to be perfect, you don't disappear. You return. You return to the part of you that existed before the rope, before the rolls, before the pressure. This unraveling also teaches compassion, because when you no longer grip your own story so tightly, you stop demanding others grip theirs. You allow people to change, to grow, to fall apart, and come back differently. You stop needing them to fit your expectations because you're no longer trying to fit your own, and the world becomes softer. Not because it changes, but because you've stopped trying to hold it still. You begin to see beauty in its movement, in its uncertainty, in the way it refuses to be tamed. That refusal used to scare you. Now it feels like truth. You learn to meet life with open hands, to let the rope fall from your fingers, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up to the truth that control was never peace. It was never safety. It was the armor that kept love out, kept joy small, kept you distant from the softness of the moment. As you unweave the rope, you rediscover choice, not the illusion of control, but real grounded choice. The ability to move with intention instead of reaction, to respond to the moment instead of rewriting it, to act from presence, not from habit. And that's when liberation begins to feel less like a concept and more like a body sensation, less like a goal and more like a return. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your mind stops racing ahead. You're not waiting for peace anymore. You're living it. You're no longer tangled in the fight to be enough. You already are. You're no longer clutching your life into shape. You're shaping it gently with care, not control. You begin to trust that what falls apart was never yours to hold, and what stays, stays freely. This kind of freedom doesn't make you reckless. It makes you respectful. You treat life as something to be touched, not gripped. You meet others with openness, not strategy. You lead yourself with curiosity, not fear. You begin to feel like the truest version of yourself, the one who doesn't need to hold everything together in order to be whole. So tonight, feel for the rope. Where is it still tight? What are you still gripping? What are you trying to hold up that may not need to be held anymore? Don't force it loose. Just breathe. Look at it. Let it speak. Say to yourself, I do not need to bind myself to be safe. I do not need to grip to be worthy. I can let this thread fall, and I will still be here. And then let the next thread fall, and the next, until what remains is not a rope, but a truth. You were never the knot. You were always the space around it. And once the rope has fallen away, once the grip has loosened and the threads of control have unraveled, what you're left holding isn't tension anymore. It's space. But in that space, a question rises that's quieter and more unsettling than the rest. If I am not the one who held it all together, who am I? If I'm not the person bound to the image I've spent so long protecting, then what remains? That question is the doorway to one of the most profound Buddhist truths, that the self we work so hard to define, manage, and protect might not be what we think, that it might be more mirror than substance, something that reflects what passes through but never holds on to it. And this is where the mirror that refused to hold the reflection becomes your teacher. In Buddhism, this teaching is called anatta, no self. It does not mean you do not exist. It means the fixed identity you keep trying to maintain is not what you truly are. The voice in your head saying, "This is me." The image you present to the world, the personality traits you think define you. All of that is in constant motion. And yet we suffer when we try to freeze those images. When we try to hold the reflection still, the mirror shows what's there, but it doesn't cling to it. It reflects, but it doesn't absorb. And when you begin to see yourself like this, something inside you begins to soften. The constant need to control how you're seen, how you appear, how consistent your identity looks to the world, it all starts to fall away. Not because you've lost who you are, but because you've stopped needing to prove it. This detachment from identity is not disconnection, it's freedom. It allows you to meet each moment as something new, not as someone defined by the past, not as a person boxed in by their own labels, but as awareness itself, open and shifting with the world, no longer chained to a reflection that was never meant to be permanent. Think of how often you defend yourself, not from danger, but from someone misunderstanding who you are. Think of the energy spent maintaining the version of yourself you've created in your mind. You say, "I'm this kind of person," and then build your decisions around that image. But what happens when that image no longer fits? When life asks you to become something else, to change, to evolve, the suffering comes from trying to protect the reflection. When the mirror is asking you to let it go, this happens in subtle ways. You feel anger, and you say, "But I'm not an angry person." You feel doubt, and you say, "But I'm supposed to be confident." And so the inner conflict begins not between right and wrong, but between who you think you should be and who you are in that moment. But the mirror has no such argument. It simply shows what is, and then it lets it pass. To live like the mirror is to allow the self to breathe, to let it be dynamic, to stop gripping your traits like proof of stability, to see that what you call you is just a series of impressions, memories, preferences, habits, none of which stay the same. And yet, awareness itself does not vanish. The mirror remains even as every image fades. This teaching unravels the root of so much control, because the deepest control is not over others, it's over the self. The need to appear consistent, the fear of being exposed, the desperation to fix any moment that doesn't align with the identity you've worked so hard to maintain. But what if the real you is not that fixed image, but the space that watches it change? This is why meditation can feel unsettling at first, because when you sit long enough, the personality begins to dissolve, the thoughts quiet, the roles fade, and you start to see that behind it all is just presence. Empty, clear, alert, not a void, but not a person either. Just awareness, open to everything attached. to nothing. From that space, compassion flows more easily because you no longer need to prove anything. You no longer feel separate from others. You see that just as you are not fixed, neither are they. Their anger is not who they are. Their words are not their core. You stop taking everything personally because there's no fixed person to protect. You also stop chasing validation because who is it that needs to be validated? If the self is only a reflection, the image, the role, the opinion, when you realize none of those are permanent, the urgency drops. You stop trying to be impressive. You stop trying to defend your worth. You simply exist moment to moment, allowing the mirror to reflect and release. This awareness also dissolves shame, because shame is often the result of believing that one moment defines you, that one mistake becomes your identity. But when you see the self as fluid, that moment loses its power. It becomes something that passed through, not something that stuck, and you're left with the truth. You are not your reflection. You are the clarity that sees it come and go. And what about goals, purpose, growth? They still matter, but they're no longer tied to ego. You grow because it feels right, not because you need to become someone more acceptable. You aim higher because it serves life, not because it fixes a broken image. Your path becomes more honest, more responsive, less burdened by who you're trying to become, and more rooted in what's true right now. Relationships change too. You stop expecting people to reflect back the image you want to see. You give them space to change, just as you're learning to do for yourself. You begin to love people for their essence, not for how well they mirror you. And in return, you stop feeling the need to shrink or bend to reflect what they expect. This all begins with the smallest awareness. The moment you catch yourself saying, "This isn't me," and instead of defending that image, you pause. You ask, "Who is me right now?" You let the answer change. And in that flexibility, peace enters. The control drops. The identity loosens. The mirror clears. So tonight, let the reflection go. Don't fight to hold it in place. Don't panic as it shifts. Just notice it. See how it moves. See how it dissolves. And then return not to the image, but to the space behind it. Say to yourself, "I am not what I see. I am the one who sees. I am not the reflection. I am the mirror." And in that space, feel the freedom. Feel the relief of no longer needing to hold anything still. And when the mirror no longer holds the reflection, when identity is no longer a fixed shape but a passing image, what arises next is the energy that was trapped inside that shape. The emotions that once had to fit the mold, the anger that had to be hidden, the sadness that had to be justified, the passion that had to be managed. Now, without the rigid structure of this is who I must be, those emotions have space, but space alone is not enough. What you do with that space matters because emotional energy doesn't need to be extinguished. It needs to be transformed like fire that warms without burning. This is the art of letting go, not by suppression, but through redirection. Emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. But when you try to control them, when you suppress them in order to protect your image or to avoid discomfort, they don't disappear. They go underground. They seep into the body. They rise in unexpected moments. They turn into anxiety, irritation, fatigue, not because they are dangerous, but because they have been denied the chance to move. Fire becomes destructive when trapped, but when given space, it gives light. It provides heat. It becomes useful. The Buddhist path does not ask you to be emotionless. It asks you to be intimate with what arises, to be aware of the sensations, the pull, the energy behind each emotion, not to act on it blindly, and not to bury it, but to witness it fully. That witnessing changes everything, because the moment you stop trying to fight the fire or run from it, you learn how to tend it, like a monk tending the flame at a shrine, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Take anger, for example. It's not wrong, it's not weakness. It often carries valuable information about boundaries, about injustice, about care. But when it becomes entangled with ego, when it becomes an identity or a weapon, it burns everything. The practice isn't to kill the anger. It's to sit with it long enough to hear what it's trying to say, and then to decide with clarity how to use that energy. Maybe it becomes a boundary. Maybe it becomes a conversation. Maybe it becomes action. But it's no longer fire thrown wildly. It's heat directed wisely. The same is true for grief. When grief is resisted, it becomes heaviness. When it's hidden, it becomes numbness. But when it's allowed to move, when it's felt without shame, it opens the heart. It softens the edges. It connects you to compassion, not just for your own pain, but for the shared experience of all beings. It no longer consumes you. It warms you from the inside. It becomes fuel for empathy. Even joy can burn when it's clung to. When you try to hold on to it to make it last longer than it's meant to, it turns into anxiety. The fear of losing it becomes stronger than the joy itself. But when you let joy flow, when you meet it fully without gripping, it becomes a gentle flame, one that dances lightly in your presence without needing to be owned. This is the heart of redirection. You're not suppressing the fire. You're turning it into something else, not by effort, but by awareness. Awareness is the container. It holds the emotion without letting it take over. It sees the rise of the flame and knows how to keep it from spreading out of control. And over time, you begin to feel safer inside yourself. Not because you've eliminated difficult emotions, but because you've learned how to carry them with wisdom. This changes how you move through the world. You no longer explode. You no longer implode. You express. But that expression is not loud unless it needs to be. It's not silent unless silence is true. You stop being reactive and start becoming responsive. You act from clarity, not from habit. And this also means you stop fearing your emotional intensity. Some people are wired with deep emotional energy. This isn't a flaw, it's a gift. But if you try to control it, to mute it, it will turn inward. It will drain you. Instead, the path is to learn how to channel it. Like fire through a forge, it can shape steel, create tools, forge art, but only if it is tended. Meditation helps with this, not because it eliminates emotion, but because it trains the mind to watch it, to stay with it, to feel the heat rising and not panic, to say this too is part of the path, and to breathe with it until the mind becomes still enough to understand its direction. And in everyday life, this shows up in small moments. You feel irritation during a conversation. Instead of snapping, you pause, you breathe, you notice the heat, you name it softly. Frustration, you don't fight it, you don't feed it, you simply feel it, and then you choose what to say. The fire stays contained, but its warmth shapes your response. Maybe that warmth is honesty. Maybe it's patience, but it's no longer reactive. It's deliberate. It's clean. This lesson shifts your relationship with life. You no longer hurry to lock down results. You no longer attempt to halt time. You become a participant rather than an owner. You embrace moments whole, without requiring them to endure. You offer your love wholeheartedly, without requiring it to remain. And the beauty is the more you live that way, the more on the inside you feel. Not because you've grasped anything, but because you no longer fear losing it. You feel the fullness of now, not through hold, but through presence. So many of us exist in grief, not only for what is lost, but for what they fear will depart, waiting for loss, preparing for it, existing half present in an instant they're already struggling to preserve. But the hold is the origin of so much grief. It keeps you from noticing the happiness that remains. It makes love worry. It makes peace a task. But when you let the sand slip, you encounter what's real. You sense what's still with you. You respect what passed, and you receive what is to come. Not as a substitute, but as a continuation. Tonight, pay attention to what you're still holding, not in judgment, with compassion. What do you fear losing? What do you still clasp even loosely? Tell yourself, if it's supposed to leave, I will not cause it to stay. If it's supposed to stay, I will not force it to leave. I will give fully, and I will let go freely. Then release your hand. Allow the sand to fall. And when the sand slips away without a fight, once what departs is not lamented but reverenced, the place that is left becomes something exceptional, something new to a thinking used to movement, to explanation, to defense. That place, when no longer occupied by clutching, starts to say something, but not in words, not with effort. It speaks in what still stands when all else has fallen silent. That is where the actual transformation starts. Not with a response, not with a strategy, but with the quietness that at last replies to the din. Quietness in Buddhist meditation is not passive. It is not the lack of sound, thinking, or feeling. It is the intentional cessation of the mind's urge to respond. It is the location after interior argument, after tug of war with life, where the storm of mental commentary comes to a slow, not because you coerced it, but because you moved out of its path. Life doesn't cease through stillness. It ceases through the illusion that you need to continuously respond to it. The clamor for so many becomes the norm. The commentary, the anxiety, the mental rehearsals, the anticipated futures and relived pasts. The mind constructs sound walls, and amidst it all we think we are the sounds, that we are the fear, the anger, the plotting, the recollection. But Buddhist practice has it that we are not the noise. We are the awareness that observes it, and that awareness is most powerful in silence. Not a silence of evasion, a silence of being there. When the breath is slow, when the body relaxes, when the mind no longer attempts to win, impress, justify, or control. That type of silence is not emptiness. It is fullness without clutter. Non-reaction is probably the most revolutionary teaching of the path, because it disrupts the pattern that the mind has established in order to survive, that everything can be replied to. Every provocation needs to be defended. Every pain needs to be fixed. Every doubt needs to be settled. But in quiet, the truth becomes evident. Not every thought requires your attention. Not every feeling requires your remark. Not every situation requires your interference. That doesn't mean you become apathetic. That means you become discerning. You watch the noise erupt, and rather than taking it, you let it play out. Something amazing happens. The noise starts to disintegrate, not because it was conquered, but because it wasn't fed. Reaction starves noise. Silence starves it. Stillness teaches that non-response is a response, and most often it's the smartest one. When the world has you going 1,000 ways, the wisest thing might be to sit, to breathe, to remain still until movement is authentic. Not all urgency belongs to you. Not all call is your call. Not all pressure requires your fuel. Stillness of meditation is not simply for the cushion. It's a state of being, a state of presence in the midst of chaos, without allowing yourself to become chaotic. You're taught how to listen without concurring, to feel without being overwhelmed, to see your triggers without complying. The silence is your guide, not as a withdrawal, but as clarity. It's in this silence that resistance starts to unravel, not by being forced out, but by being noticed for what it is, unnecessary. The majority of resistance stems from fear. Fear of what a moment is, fear of the way something will end. But when you stay in silence and do nothing except watch, you start to see. The moment does not destroy you. The discomfort wears off. The fear diminishes, not because you altered anything, but because you did not feed the resistance. The mind is in a state of wanting to fix, control, push. Silence, however, teaches another way. A more profound wisdom, the kind that says, let it come, let it go. You do not have to chase it. That is the start of peace, not because life is quiet, but because you are. Stillness creates depth. What used to feel overwhelming now feels far away, not taken away, but roomy. You begin to notice how much of what you were afraid of was just a wave. You didn't know how to observe how much of your anxiety was reaction to reaction. Layers of judgment, opinion, story, all disintegrating the moment you no longer engage. This also changes the way you speak. When silence is your default, your words are purer, less defensive, less performative. You only say things when something actual needs to be said. And when it's best not to say things, you're comfortable with that too. There's no need to fill space. You've come to terms with the space, and the silence starts talking back. It provides wisdom not in loud epiphes, but in gentle realizations. Clarity does not emerge because you pursued it, but because you cleared the space for it. Like muddy water clarifying when it is left alone, like a knot untying itself once the tugging ceases. You come to trust the silence, to hold it in reverence, to become at home within it, and in so doing, you cease attempting to create peace. You begin living within it, because peace is not made, it's revealed. It's made visible when the din is no longer in the way. This type of quiet doesn't need you to stop life. It invites you to stop believing that every feeling is a mandate, that every thought needs a stage, that every feeling is an indication that you're broken. It invites you to sit, breathe, and remember. Awareness doesn't need noise to be aware. Truth does not require force to be understood. This practice is a sanctuary. When the world comes up fierce, when the mind whirls, when others seek to draw you into their tempest, you come back to quiet, to the breath, to the space that exists beyond all of that. And from there, you decide, not react. From there, you answer, not defend. From there, you live, not survive. Let the noise be there tonight. Don't resist it. Don't repair it. Don't pursue it. Let it rise. Let it pass. And observe what is left behind. Repeat to yourself, I don't have to respond to every voice. I don't need to repair every feeling. I can stay in the quiet. I can allow the din to fall away, and then breathe and wait. The quiet is already present. Releasing is not surrendering. It is giving yourself back. Through these holy hours, we've walked through frayed ropes and still waters, through burning fires and quiet whispers, through open gates and shattered mirrors that no longer held us captive. We've encountered silence, not as emptiness, but as healing. And what we've discovered in each breath, each image, each surrender is something more profound than control, something softer yet more powerful: freedom. The freedom to not chase what's fading, the freedom to be still while the world spins, the freedom to stop holding your breath, waiting for things to go your way. You've seen now that what slips away makes room, that silence answers what noise never could. That peace isn't won. It's revealed the moment you stop trying to manage what was never yours. So you go off to sleep tonight. Take this with you. Not all of it has to make sense. Not all of it has to be solved. And nothing at all has to be clutched tighter for you to be whole. You were already enough before the grasping started, and you are even more so now with open hands. If something in these teachings touched you tonight, if a single phrase helped you breathe easier or release a little more, share it in the comments below. Let someone else know what whispered to your heart, because what we release alone, we often confirm together. And if this type of peace is something you desire more of in your life, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next step on the path. Allow these teachings to greet you again and again whenever you most need them. You've done enough for now. Release, rest deeply, and allow the Dharma to guide you through the night.